Good morning, and welcome to the 16th Annual Rockland Autism Symposium. My name is Bill Schul, and I'm the Executive Director of the Venture Foundation. The Foundation has been administering the Rockland Autism Symposium, or RAS as we call it, for 7 years now, and personally this will be my 15th year helping to produce the event. I often refer to John Allen Murphy as the founder of RAS as my Dutch uncle, a wise and benevolent man providing sage advice whether I ask for it or not. Along with our premier sponsor, Ina and Josh Needleman of MindWorks Charitable Trust, and Allison Singer of the Autism Science Foundation, they are all due sincere thanks for their inspiration, effort, and affable support. They help keep the symposium running strong. To paraphrase an adaptable quote, our task is not to foresee the future, but to enable it. Those words foretell the impetus of the origins of RAS and apply particularly well to those who live with, love, care for, teach, and work with those on the autism spectrum, especially now. To quote a friend, living with ASD is hard damn work. A tough road even when everything is normal, ordered, and going well. But all that can be thrown into absolute chaos when things are abnormal, disrupted, and going poorly. This year, RAS is following the blend that we began with and has constructed a program that will provide all of you with knowledge, insights, empathy, and vision to help cope with the current temporary normal caused by the pandemic. Today's format will fit this virtual venue, 40-minute presentations on 4 distinct topics by our guest speakers, each renowned in their field. We believe those topics will be helpful to parents, teachers, advisors, therapists, agency leaders, staff, and government personnel alike. To conclude, despite the unanimous opinion of my 2 grandchildren, I'll be the least exciting person you will hear from today, so please enjoy our program. Miss Allison Singer. Allison, a near original member of the RAS gang, joined the battle early on and has played a fundamental role in the ever-constant talent search for those who can bring wisdom, insight, and advice to those in the ASD battle. President of the Autism Science Foundation, Allison has her ear to the ground and finger on the pulse of the leading scientists in this field. So to introduce our first speaker, ladies and gentlemen, Allison Singer.
Thanks so much, Bill. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Let me add my thanks to Josh and Ina Needleman, to John Murphy, to Bill Schul, and everyone at the Venture Foundation for making today's event possible. I hope that next year we can be together in person. And frankly, if we are, it will be due to the work of our first speaker, Dr. Paul Offit. Paul has been working around the clock for the past 18 months as part of the federal team that's focused on COVID vaccine approval and COVID disease mitigation. If you turn your TV on ever, you will see him having his 6 to 15 seconds of fame every day, either on CNN, MSNBC, CBS Evening News, or frequently all of them. We are so honored that he made the time in his schedule for our event today. Dr. Offit is director of the Vaccine Education Center and professor of pediatrics in the Division of Infectious Diseases at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And he is the Maurice Hilleman Professor of Vaccinology at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Offit is an internationally recognized expert in the fields of virology and immunology, and is currently a member of the FDA Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, which is the group we hear about all the time on the news that is charged with analyzing the data from the COVID vaccine trials and making recommendations about vaccine use. He's a founding board member of the Autism Science Foundation and of the Foundation for Vaccine Research, and a member of the Institute of Medicine and co-editor of the foremost vaccine text, Vaccines. If I read all his awards, all his papers, all his honors, we'd have no time left to hear from him. So I will just say that I am thrilled to have him join us today to talk about the best strategies for stopping the COVID-19 pandemic. Paul?
Thank you very much, Allison. Let me see if I can share my screen here with this and this. Okay, hopefully you're all seeing that. So what I'm going to talk about in part is how we can best stop the COVID-19 pandemic and the obstacles that stand in the way of stopping it. So let's Okay, so let me go back one. There. Okay, so there's basically it's going to be stopped in two ways: by the immunity that's induced by vaccination, or the immunity that's being induced by natural infection. So, as you well know, hopefully, those who are vaccinated are far less likely to be hospitalized or die from this virus because vaccines work. And it doesn't matter which vaccine you've gotten, they all work very well at preventing serious illness, meaning the kind of illness that causes you to seek medical attention or go to the hospital or go to the ICU or worse. This slide just shows the clear evidence that if you've gotten a vaccine, you dramatically reduce not only your incidence of hospitalization and death, but also to sort of at any level of symptomatic disease. Okay, so second is the immunity that is induced by natural infection. So if you look on the MSNBC or CNN, they'll often show the number of cases that have accrued in the United States. So the current number is 45 million, but that's just the number of people who've been tested and found to be infected. When you do antibody surveillance studies, that number is much higher. It's probably closer to 100 million people have already been naturally infected in this country, and possibly more than that. Does natural infection protect against illness? It certainly does. This was a study of 52,000 healthcare workers in the Cleveland Clinic Health System between December and May of this past year. And of the 1,400 workers that were infected but not subsequently vaccinated, they found no disease in those who were previously infected and vaccinated. So this was sort of early on when you were still very close to your most recent booster dose. So the question is, how has that lasted? And this was a study that was done by Mike Nuzensweig and co-workers that was published in Nature, where he found that protection against serious illness lasted for at least a year. And when you consider the fact that protection against serious disease is not mediated by neutralizing antibodies, it's mediated by immunological memory cells like memory B cells, which tend to be long-lived, meaning years. So I think protection against serious illness following either natural infection or immunization against serious disease will be long-lived. And so as of October 15th, about 405 million doses of COVID-19 have been administered. Therefore, about 57% of the population is fully vaccinated. Also assume about 100 million people have been naturally infected. Now, these aren't two separate groups. There are people who've been vaccinated and naturally infected, people who've been naturally infected and vaccinated. But if you combine these two groups, you're probably talking about at least 75% of the United States population that's protected against serious illness. So is that enough? Is that enough to start to get herd immunity? And by herd immunity, what I mean is that there is enough of the population that's protected that makes it very difficult for the virus to spread from one person to another. Okay, so what percentage of the population needs to be immune to induce herd immunity? There's actually a formula for this. It's based on two variables. The first variable is the contagiousness of the virus. So this particular strain that's currently circulating in the United States, the Delta variant, is a highly transmissible virus. It has a contagiousness index, or R0, of between 5 and 9. So what that means is a contagiousness index of 5 means that if I'm infected and I just go about my normal day, and everybody I come in contact with during my normal day is susceptible, I will infect 5 more people, and then they will infect my 5 more people, et cetera. That's a really high contagiousness index. I mean, you're now in sort of the area of chickenpox, which is a highly contagious disease. So that when you have that kind of contagiousness, you know that you're going to have to immunize a fairly high percentage of the population. To put this in context, you see measles all the way over there on the right is the most contagious of the vaccine preventable diseases. So the second variable is effectiveness of the vaccine. Obviously, the more effective the vaccine, the fewer number of people you would need to vaccinate. So if there's a formula for this that's used to determine this, it's R0 minus 1 over R0 divided by the effectiveness of the vaccine. So if we assume an R0 of 5, which is really low, and a vaccine effectiveness of 90% against significant shedding, which I think is generous, high, then you have sort of a 5 minus 1 over 5, which is 0.8 divided by 0.9, which is basically 0.9 or 90%. You would need to vaccinate or at least have either vaccinated or naturally infected 90% of the population. And I think that's low. I think it's probably a little closer to 95%. So I think we still need to vaccinate probably another 40 million more people, or 40 million more people need to be infected, which would not be the way you'd like to go, since natural infection can cause hospitalization and death. Okay, so I think there are three obstacles to herd immunity, and that's the sort of center of this talk. Oops, how did I miss this? Okay, so obstacle number one, variants. So the virus that raised its head in Wuhan, the so-called WU/2020, it is not the virus that left China. The virus that left China was the first variant. It was called the D614G variant. It still hasn't been given a Greek letter designation. But that's the virus. That variant virus is the one that swept through Asia, swept through Europe, swept through the United States, killed about 200,000 people here. That was then replaced by the Alpha variant, which was first detected in the United Kingdom, which was more transmissible than was that first D614G variant. And then that pretty much replaced then the D614, which has now been replaced by the Delta variant, which is remarkably contagious. I don't know if you've sort of followed the news lately, but recently the UK has isolated a Delta plus variant, which now accounts for about 8% of cases in the United Kingdom. It's frankly hard to imagine a virus much more contagious than the Delta variant, but obviously people will be keeping their eyes on the Delta plus variant. So this slide's a little old. It says that the Delta variant accounts for about 94% of the cases in the US. It's probably closer to 98% now. But this virus, the most frustrating thing, and there are many frustrating things about people who are refusing to be vaccinated, what they're allowing this virus to do is continue to reproduce itself, continue to create mutations, continue to create new variants, which may become progressively more resistant to vaccine-induced immunity. So we've had 3 variants in the past year and a half. I'm sure we're not done with this yet, but we can be done with it if we had an adequate percentage of the population that was fully vaccinated. Okay, the second obstacle is misinformation. So this from a New Yorker cartoon, honey, come look, I found some information all the world's top scientists and doctors missed, the scourge of social media. So I'm going to go through sort of a number of these false claims and try and debunk them. So the first is that COVID-19 vaccines aren't necessary for children. Over the past few weeks, there has clearly been a dramatic rise in the number of children who are infected with this virus. I mean, it's the most recent week was about 150,000 per week. The weeks before that, it was 200,000, 250,000. Associated with that, we're having about 2,000 children who are hospitalized a week from this virus. And so I was on service last week at Children's Hospital Philadelphia, and we certainly are representing that national average. We had a number of children in our hospital, including a handful that were in the intensive care unit. And about 600 children have died from this virus, which puts it in the, sort of the similar range to measles pre-vaccine, where about 500 children would die every year. So certainly a disease worth preventing. And what's interesting is if you look at what happened when the virus first came into this country on the sort of left-hand portion of this slide, children accounted for fewer than 3% of cases. Now they account for about 27% of cases. So I think we can reasonably argue this is a childhood disease at this point. The Delta variant is highly transmissible, and it has reached down and sought out a susceptible population. And that susceptible population now is young children. I mean, although we have a vaccine for the 12 to 18-year-old, only about 45% of 12 to 15-year-olds have been vaccinated, and we don't have a vaccine yet for the less than 12-year-old. The FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee will be meeting about this on October 26th next week, and then within a week of that, assuming that the committee and the FDA agrees to move forward on that vaccine, we'll have a vaccine for available by the following week. But again, the vaccine doesn't work if you don't give it. So although we have a vaccine for 12 to 15 years of age, it's still underutilized. And it really breaks my heart when I go into the hospital, for example, last week, and see a number of children between 12 and 17 years of age who are in the intensive care unit with their parents crying next to them because they're watching their child suffer from this disease. And invariably, always, the child is not vaccinated, and frankly, neither are the parents. So this was hard enough last year before we had a vaccine, but it's even harder this year because it's all preventable. The other issue is, wait, did I have this yet? In terms of adolescents, this was a study that was done back in June, reported in Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, looking at hospitalized adolescents between 12 and 17 years of age, because everybody assumes that, that their young, healthy adolescent is going to not be hurt by this virus. But this was a study of basically 204 adolescents, nearly a third of whom required admission to the intensive care unit, 5% of whom required mechanical ventilation, and a third of whom were perfectly healthy before that and had no risk factors. So everyone is vulnerable. And then this particular syndrome, which you probably all heard of, called multi-system inflammatory disease of children. Typically what happens with these children is they often are found to have just serendipitously an asymptomatic infection because they were in contact with someone who was a friend or family member that was ill. And so they have either an asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic infection, and then is gone a month later. When you test them a month later, they're not excreting virus anymore, but they do have antibodies, and they present with high fever and then involvement of their lungs, kidneys, heart, liver, and children are quite sick with this syndrome, and roughly 46 have died associated with this syndrome. And then lastly, I think probably no group has suffered the lack of socialization more than children. I think the isolation that they've been forced to have, and certainly the virtual learning over the past year has been really hard for them. And just in Philadelphia, I can tell you that last year, our child abuse rate dropped to 0. And it wasn't because it actually was 0, it's just because child abuse is often picked up in the school. And so those children didn't get to have that opportunity. And frankly, in Philly, for many of these children, it's the only decent meal they get during the day is that school lunch. Okay, the next is that COVID-19 vaccines decrease fertility. This is one of the more common questions that I get asked. So the fear of this fact that the vaccines could affect fertility was born when 2 researchers petitioned the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, and which is essentially the equivalent of Europe's FDA, to withdraw approval for COVID-19 vaccines, claiming that the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, which is the protein to which you make antibodies when you're given a vaccine, shared genetic sequences with a protein called syncytin-1, which is a protein that sits on the surface of placental cells and is important for placental cell health. Now, first of all, that was wrong. If you compare these genetic sequences, they're quite different. I mean, it's like saying you and I both have the same Social Security number because they both contain the number 5. So not only are these 2 proteins different in terms of their genetic sequence, they're immunologically different. When you make an antibody response to SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, you don't make an antibody response to syncytin-1. So the original premise was wrong. Also, just as supplemental information, although when Pfizer and Moderna did their phase 3 trials, they asked that the women that participated in those trials not become pregnant. Nonetheless, there were 36 pregnancies during those trials because, as Jeff Goldblum said in Jurassic Park, life finds a way. And so you would expect then that if it was true that the vaccine negatively impacted fertility, then most, if not all, of those pregnancies should have been in the placebo group. But that wasn't true. They were equally divided in the vaccine and placebo group, basically making it clear that the vaccine neither enhances nor negatively affects fertility. And also, if the argument is that if you make antibodies to the spike protein, you're also making an antibody response to your own placenta. Remember, more than 100 million people have been infected over the past year and a half. So what's happened to the birth rate? Because they all those people who are naturally infected are making antibody responses to the spike protein. And so the answer to that question is that the birth rate has basically remained the same. So this is completely false, but it's just been hard to unring the bell. Okay, the next is that COVID-19 vaccines alter your DNA. You can sort of see where this comes from. When you're trying to get an immune response to a viral protein, there's a few ways you can do that. You can give a live attenuated viral vaccine, like the measles vaccine, in which case you're giving the viral protein. Or you can give sort of a whole killed viral vaccine, like the poliovirus vaccine, in which case, again, you're giving the viral protein. Or you can give just the viral protein itself, which is the hepatitis B vaccine or the human papillomavirus vaccine. That's not what you're doing here. With these mRNA vaccines of Pfizer and Moderna, or with these so-called vectored virus vaccines with Johnson & Johnson, you're giving the gene that codes for the coronavirus spike protein. So your cell then takes up that, in this case, messenger RNA, and then that messenger RNA is translated to a protein, and then you make an immune response to that protein. So this is a genetic vaccine. These are genetic vaccines, and they're the first really genetic vaccines that we've had in any sort of broad scale use. So you can see why people, when they hear the word genetic vaccine, would be scared that that would alter your DNA. So let's discuss that. We'll talk about the mRNA vaccines, particularly since they're the most used. So when you're inoculated in your arm with Moderna's vaccine or Pfizer's vaccine, the messenger RNA is then taken up into your cytoplasm, where it's then translated to a protein through the ribosomal system. Now, the nucleus contains DNA. So in order for the mRNA to affect your genes, which is to say to affect your DNA, it would have to enter the nucleus, which requires a nuclear access signal, which these mRNA molecules don't have. Even if it was to enter the nucleus, remember there's about 200,000 pieces of mRNA in your cytoplasm making a variety of proteins like insulin or hemoglobin or whatever protein or enzyme is necessary for life. So it's not a novel system in the sense that it's a perfectly natural thing to have messenger RNA make proteins in your cytoplasm. But in any case, even if it did enter the nucleus, which it can't because it doesn't have a nuclear access signal, it's RNA, it's not DNA. So it would have to be converted to DNA, which requires an enzyme called reverse transcriptase, which it also doesn't have. Even if it had the reverse transcriptase and could enter the nucleus, it still has to be inserted into DNA, which requires an enzyme called integrase, which it also doesn't have. So the chances that the mRNA can alter your DNA is not only small, it's zero. It's not possible. Although I never quite understand why it is that people think when your DNA is altered that it's always for the worse. I mean, why can't you develop X-ray vision or become Spider-Man? But you know, at the Vaccine Education Center, we never like to go too far away from the science. So just to make it clear, you become a Spider-Man when you're bitten by a radioactive spider. Okay, next, that COVID-19 vaccine shouldn't be given during pregnancy. It's actually been interesting to watch the saga of this story. So normally what happens when vaccines are tested, as they were in the phase 3 trials for Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, they're rarely tested in pregnant women, which is too bad because certainly pregnant women were at increased risk of this disease. Of being hurt by this virus. But nonetheless, they weren't tested, or at least not in any reasonable numbers. And when that happens, the CDC will always say contraindicated for use in pregnancy. But they didn't do that here. What they did here was they said a pregnant woman could, when this vaccine was first released, could reasonably choose to get this vaccine. Now, the reason that they said that was that when you compare women who are pregnant with women of the same age who aren't pregnant, pregnant women are 3 times more likely to require intensive care unit care, 2 to 3 times more likely to require intubation, mechanical ventilation, or ECMO support, which is a heart-lung machine, and 1.5 times more likely to die. So that's why they said that. And when they said that, thousands and then tens of thousands and now hundreds of thousands of pregnant women made the choice then to get a vaccine. With that, there was a system called the V-Safe system that then allowed researchers like Tim Shimabukuro at the CDC to look at pregnant women who got the vaccine, compare them to pregnant women who didn't get the vaccine to see whether there were any differences in either pregnancy or neonatal outcomes. And when they looked at pregnancy outcomes like miscarriage or stillbirth, there were no differences between the vaccinated or unvaccinated group of pregnant women. Same thing was true with pregnancy complications like gestational diabetes or eclampsia or intrauterine growth retardation. And the same was true with the children when they were born. There were no increased instances of premature birth, preterm birth, small for gestational age, or neonatal death. So it was therefore safe for pregnant women to get this vaccine. And then the CDC changed its recommendation to that pregnant women are recommended to receive this vaccine. Over the last couple of weeks, they've changed the recommendation again that it is urgently important for pregnant women to get this vaccine because many pregnant women are being hospitalized and either being put into the intensive care unit, on ventilators, delivering their babies prematurely, and it becomes all the more important for them to get vaccine now when we're suffering this even to a greater extent. Okay, then moving right along, according to the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, COVID-19 vaccines kill people. So the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System is a passive system run by the CDC and the FDA, where if you believe you have a problem, you can just report it on a one-page online form to this system. It's at best a hypothesis generating system. It can't test the hypothesis because there's no control group. So you just know, got a vaccine, had a problem, maybe the problem was associated with the vaccine, but there's no screening. So you could, for example, fill out a form that said, I gave my child a vaccine and they became the Incredible Hulk, and that will be in the system. That won't be eliminated from the system. So everything counts, basically. And so it's a very, I think euphemistically, I think one could say it's a very noisy system. Which brings us to Tucker Carlson. So on May 6, 2021, on Fox News, Tucker Carlson said, quote, 3,362 people apparently died after getting the COVID-19 vaccine. More people, according to VAERS, have died after getting the COVID-19 shot than from all other vaccines. So was Tucker Carlson right? So there's about 750 deaths in the United States per 100,000 per year. Therefore, 2 people die per 100,000 every day. By May 6, 2021, when Tucker Carlson made his proclamation, 110 million people in the United States had been vaccinated. Therefore, 2,200 people would have been expected to die within 24 hours of receiving the vaccine, and 4,400 within 48 hours of receiving the vaccine, unless the vaccines conferred immortality, which they don't. The SARS-CoV-2 vaccines only prevent SARS-CoV-2, not everything else that happens in life. They don't prevent deaths from cancer, heart disease, lung disease, car accidents, etc. So the 3,300 deaths claimed by Carlson to have been caused by the vaccines are exactly what one would have expected, assuming that vaccines killed no one. Okay, and then this is my personal favorite. I was actually in the news just within the past 24 hours that vaccinated teachers are dangerous to students. Actually, that's now been extended to vaccinated students are dangerous to other students. This comes from the Centner Academy, the ironically named the Brain School, where the headmaster of this particular school believes that a teacher who has gotten this vaccine will shed then this toxic protein, SARS-CoV-2, which will then be toxic to to children in the school. And then just within the last day or so, not only are teachers prohibited from coming in till a month after they've been vaccinated, but so are students. These are not live attenuated viral vaccines like the measles or mumps or German measles or chickenpox vaccine or one of the rotavirus vaccines where you're constantly or it's possible that you could shed small amounts of virus. This is just your cells making a protein, much as it makes other proteins like insulin or hemoglobin. So, if it were true that if you stood next to somebody who has got a vaccine and that meant that you would also have SARS-CoV-2 spike protein enter your body, that would be great news, because then what that would mean is that if you had like insulin-dependent diabetes, you wouldn't need to get insulin shots. All you would need to do is stand next to somebody who makes insulin normally, and then you would get insulin. Or if you have sickle cell disease, you could just stand next to somebody who's making normal hemoglobin, and you wouldn't need to get blood transfusions periodically during the year. So as Neil deGrasse Tyson says, quote, you can't use logic and reason to convince someone out of an argument that they didn't use logic and reason to get into. The third obstacle, and this is the biggest one, I really do think of the 65 million people who currently are refusing to get vaccine, it really centers around this sort of claim to personal freedom, that this is my body, this is the bodily autonomy, this is my right to do as I please, which is fine if you're talking about the tetanus vaccine. If you step on a rusty nail, you go to the emergency department and they offer you a tetanus vaccine, and you say, no thanks, I don't want a tetanus vaccine. And then you get tetanus, you're not going to affect anybody else. Tetanus is not a contagious disease. This is a contagious disease. This is a decision you're making for other people, and it's not your right to do that. Sorry, it's not your civil liberty to catch and transmit a potentially fatal infection. Whereas Oliver Wendell Holmes said, your right to swing your fist ends at the tip of my nose. You can't make a choice for others, which is what you're doing here, any more than you can run a stop sign. Or, you know, when if someone in a classroom is allergic to peanuts, I've never heard of a parent saying, look, it is my right to have my child eat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in that classroom. That's my right, because they respect that child who is at high risk of having a severe allergic reaction to peanuts. Well, this is the same thing, except it's not one child, it's every child in the class who can be affected. This isn't new, by the way. This is a cartoon from more than 100 years ago, showing that same sort of notion. This is back in the days of the smallpox vaccine, that it's, you know, this whole notion of forced vaccination, and again, an assault on personal liberty. So what does personal liberty look like? It looks like this. Here's an event that occurred just this past August. Springfield, a long-term care outbreak infects 64, kills 5, began with one unvaccinated employee who was sick, who then proceeded to infect those who were at highest risk. Same thing here. This was a report in Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report out of Marin County, California, with a teacher who was, as you see here, occasionally unmasked and was infected with the Delta variant. She worked for 2 days in that classroom, and of the 24 children in her class, she proceeded to infect 12. You can see just from this slide that there was a disadvantage to sitting in the front 2 rows there in her classroom. So that's it. That's what personal freedom looks like. So I'm going to stop right there and take any questions you may have. This is the URL for the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Paul. Terrific stuff. The first question that we've got several here. The first one is there any evidence or studies that have been done on if there is a difference in impact on people on the spectrum or people with IDD?
Not that I know of, at least not that I've seen published, although they may have been published and I missed it, but I have not seen that. I can't think of a reason why that group would be at any sort of risk biologically, for why they wouldn't be able to mount an adequate immune response, or why they would be at greater risk of some of these extremely rare side effects like myocarditis or thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome, the clotting associated with J&J's vaccine, but haven't seen it.
Okay, second one, if a person had COVID, why do vaccine anyway?
Yeah, you know, that's a good question. And it's come up at our hospital, because we now have a mandate at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. You could reasonably make this argument. You could say, look, I've been naturally infected. If I look at the immunological studies that have been done, I have basically the same sort of frequency of memory B cells as someone who was vaccinated. I think I am protected against serious illness, as much so as someone who was not who was vaccinated. And I think that's true. However, I would say this, though. If you've been naturally infected, there's now a couple studies, one of them was done by Mike Nuzensweig, where if you then vaccinate that person, you clearly not only boost their antibody responses, which is not surprising, you also, when followed over the next few months, clearly by a factor of about 2.5-fold decrease their risk then of subsequently being infected. And I think more importantly, what you do when you vaccinate is you broaden their immune response against the variants of concern. So there's certainly an advantage to being vaccinated if you've been naturally infected. But if somebody argues, you know, I don't want to lose my job because I feel I'm, you know, to some extent as protected against serious disease as someone who is vaccinated, I can see that argument. I can tell you that the administration is thinking about this, because they're sort of coming up against people who are choosing to lose their jobs. I mean, to me, the poster boy for choosing to lose your job, since this is New York, is Kyrie Irving. I mean, the man is willing to lose tens of millions of dollars because he doesn't want to get a vaccine. It shows you how entrenched people are. I mean, he's not being asked to get a heart transplant. He's just being asked to get a couple of shots, yet he still does that. Although my favorite, I don't know if anybody watches Ted Lasso, but second season of Ted Lasso, the Ted Lasso character had a great line. He's at a restaurant. They ask him what kind of water, you know, he wants. He says, I like my water, you know, like Kyrie Irving likes his earth, flat.
Well, I know Knick fans are happy about his decision, but we'll leave that for another conversation. Another question here is, what's the legitimacy of therapeutics and monoclonal antibodies as treatments?
Right. So I think monoclonal antibodies are actually underused. I think if you're early in your illness, so the way that this infection works, the way all infections work, is the virus enters your nose and throat. It begins to reproduce itself hundreds of times, thousands of times. And then what happens is your immune response kicks in. That's when you develop symptoms. The symptoms that you have are a consequence of your immune response. But when you're very early in infection, when the virus replication is still an important part of the disease process, monoclonal antibodies are of value. They are. So I think that's true. I think also very early in the disease process, antivirals like remdesivir or now molnupiravir, are of value. Not later. I mean, not once you're in the hospital, it's too late to get monoclonal antibodies, to get antivirals like molnupiravir or remdesivir. But I think it is of value. But again, it's like everybody hailed molnupiravir as like this amazing drug because it reduces your chance of hospitalization by 50%. Vaccines reduce your chance of hospitalization by like 99%. It's the better choice. And as as is said by Ben Franklin, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Because at Penn, you're supposed to give one Ben Franklin quote every lecture.
That's terrific. Another one, would the children that have been vaccinated in the near future be included in the 40 million that need to be vaccinated to count?
Yes. No, children, account for about 20% of the population. So yes, children count. They definitely can. And also there's it's true, when the virus first entered the country, the mantra was children get infected less frequently, and when they're infected less severely. That's true. But that doesn't mean that they can't be infected or that they can't be infected seriously or even fatally, as we're learning now that as we've immunized more of the older age groups, now you're seeing this more susceptible younger age group is starting to be hit harder. But I think what happens with the children often is, although they often aren't as serious, they can certainly be the source of the virus entering the home, especially in these sort of multi-generational families where the child can often be the source of that infection.
Okay. Is your immunity when you get COVID without having had the vaccine as long-lasting as the vaccine?
So it depends how you define protection. If you define protection against serious illness, I think the answer is probably yes. If you define protection as protection against infection or, which asymptomatic infection, mildly symptomatic infection, low, moderately symptomatic infection, I think that the vaccines probably induce somewhat of a better response there. And the booster will certainly help with that too. But I think if you argue the goal of the vaccine is protection against severe illness, I think both natural infection and vaccination do that and will do it, I would predict, for years. I mean, there'll be some erosion, but not much over time. I mean, it's memory. So this virus, the incubation period of this virus, I mean, the time from when you're first exposed to when you develop symptoms is about 6 days. That's long enough for memory B cells to become activated, differentiate, become antibody producing cells, and start to affect your the chance that you will have a serious illness. I sort of think of memory cells as like a fire extinguisher in the kitchen. I mean, what the purpose of the fire extinguisher in the kitchen is not to stop the original fire on the stove. It's not going to do that. That would be the example of an asymptomatic infection or mildly symptomatic infection. The purpose of the fire extinguisher is so your house doesn't burn down. So, which is the example of the serious infection. So that's what memory B cells do.
Terrific. There was an earlier question, which may not be exactly on target, but there's advertisements or there's notifications for third shots for Moderna, for example, that are not considered, since they haven't been approved yet or officially been approved yet, as boosters. What's the difference between a third shot and a booster shot, or a third shot and a second shot?
That is a great question. So if you look, for example, at the polio vaccine is basically a 3-dose vaccine. And the last dose that you get, because you're getting it usually 4 to 6 months after the previous dose, provides excellent memory responses. It is a belief by some members of this administration that this was always going to be a 3-dose vaccine, that the mRNA vaccines, were this not a pandemic, would always have been a 3-dose vaccine because you needed that sort of 4 to 6 month separation in doses to induce excellent memory, based on what we know about these inactivated viral vaccines, like, say, the polio vaccine. I'm not sure that's true, because first of all, this isn't an inactivated viral vaccine. It's not, nor is it a live attenuated viral vaccine, but it's closer, I would argue, to a live attenuated viral vaccine, in that you're making viral proteins in your cells, which is what happens with live attenuated viral vaccines. And also, all the data to date have shown that memory has held up, meaning immunologists like John Wary at Penn, have shown that memory cells have held up at least for 6 months, 8 months after a vaccine. So it's not clear to me you really need that to be a 3-dose vaccine. Now, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine launched at the end of February as a single dose. But when they did that, they were in the midst of a 2-dose trial. They were a 30,000 person 2-dose trial, because they knew from their so-called phase 1 studies, so-called dose ranging studies, they knew that that second dose boosted neutralizing antibodies. They knew that. And so then the question was, does that also offer better protection? Well, now they've finished the 30,000 child or person study, adult study, to show that was that is a 2-dose vaccine. I don't think of that as a booster dose. I think of that as a 2-dose vaccine. But in terms of the booster doses that we're now giving, and we're in this kind of like 3rd dose fever kind of moment now regarding booster doses, we've now scared everybody into thinking that 2 doses wasn't enough, although I would argue that 2 doses is enough to protect against serious illness, frankly, for all groups, with the possible exception of the 70 to 79-year-old. I think there, the Israeli data do clearly show that a booster helps. These other groups for whom the booster now is recommended, it's not clear to me that that is going to make a big difference. But nonetheless, the door's been open and it keeps getting wider, and so be it. Now, if the purpose, and it's really largely a stated purpose there, is that we're giving a booster dose because neutralizing antibodies start to wane. True. It's true of all vaccines. And as neutralizing antibodies wane, you're going to have an increased incidence of asymptomatic, mildly symptomatic infection, which is also true of all vaccines. I think the biggest communication error we made with this vaccine is calling those breakthrough infections. That's not a breakthrough. I mean, when Brett Kavanaugh gets 2 doses of mRNA vaccine and then has an asymptomatic infection, he won. That's right. That's great. I mean, when that outbreak in Provincetown, when 346 people who had been vaccinated developed, asymptomatic, mildly symptomatic infection, 4 people were hospitalized. That was 1.2%. That's a win. That's vaccines working the way they should. Nonetheless, that was the birth of the term breakthrough associated with that outbreak. And if that's a breakthrough, which implies failure, all vaccines are failures. I mean, the rotavirus vaccine, the whooping cough vaccine, the influenza vaccine, if you get the influenza vaccine, and we did what we do with this vaccine, which is do PCRs on people who've gotten an influenza vaccine, you're going to find a lot of people who are asymptomatically infected or mildly symptomatically infected, but who cares? I mean, you just want them to stay out of the hospital, out of the ICU, and out of the morgue, which is basically the goal of every vaccine and has been met by this vaccine. So if we're saying we're giving a booster to increase antibodies, that may not be the end of it. There's also, even after a 3rd dose or a booster dose, still going to be a fading of neutralizing antibodies over 9 months, a year, and then we're giving another booster dose. Those are booster doses, and I just fear we're sort of tripping down the wrong path here. I think we've scared people into thinking that 2 doses was not enough, and 2 doses is enough to protect against serious illness, which is the goal. It doesn't mean you may not still get an asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic infection. But we're learning as we go here, and I think the communication has been confusing.
Understood.
Even Lindsey Graham, just to quote Republicans, but the Lindsey Graham, when he was vaccinated, he had a respiratory infection that included sinusitis. He had a mild sinusitis, and he said correctly, quote, "This would have been much worse if I hadn't been vaccinated."
Yeah.
You never get to quote Republicans about like things that they say that are like great about science or medicine. I just wanted to take that opportunity.
I understand. SARS-CoV-1 disappeared with neither vaccine nor infection-induced immunity. What makes SARS-CoV-2 so different from 1?
Asymptomatic infection. SARS-CoV-1 had very little asymptomatic infection. It was all moderate or severe infection. So it was very easy to tell who was infected. Very easy to put a moat around those who were infected. The horror of this virus is that probably 50% of the transmissions are from people who are asymptomatic. This sort of reminds me, being an old person, as you can see if you're seeing me on your screen, of polio. I mean, polio was also only about 1 of every 200 people who was infected with polio, who shed polio in their stools, were symptomatic. I mean, that was also a largely asymptomatically transmitted virus, which is why it scared people so much.
Right. Another one, and we're going to have time for a couple more, but why is the same amount of vaccine given to people of different weights, a 300-pound person versus a 100-pound person? There are people who are afraid or wary of taking something that is for an 11-year-old child, for example, that would be given to an older person, a bigger person.
Right. So if you take a drug like amoxicillin, you want to make sure that there's a certain amount of that drug, a certain number of sort of micrograms per milliliter of that drug in your bloodstream. so they can travel to the site of infection, pneumonia, meningitis, and then treat that infection. So so therefore, the volume of distribution, how big you are matters, and therefore those dosing is also often based on weight or size. That's not true of vaccines. I mean, vaccines don't, don't think of them that way. When you get a shot in your arm of a vaccine, it's then taken up by a local draining lymph node, processed, presented to the immune system, and then you induce an immune response, which then is sort of distributed throughout. So those lymphocytes in your, or white blood cells in your, say, the draining lymph node under your arm, then travels to other places. So don't think of it in the same way as that. I mean, what's going to happen here is that there's the 30 micrograms. If you use Pfizer as an example, it's 30 micrograms for 2 doses in the people over 12. For the 5 to 11-year-old, it's going to be 10 micrograms, which is a third the dose. For the 6-month-old to the 5-year-old, it's going to probably be 3 micrograms, which is a tenth of the adult dose. And that's the way those studies are being done.
Okay. This is the last one we have time for this morning. You certainly, if you saw my list here, it would go on for hours, and people didn't pay the cable bill. So last one here. What about those that have gotten COVID after having both doses of the vaccine? Would natural antibodies be a better choice or path than a booster?
If you've gotten, let's say, 2 doses of an mRNA vaccine, and then you've gotten a natural infection, an asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic infection, you just won the immunity lottery, because you actually now have a very good broad response against all variants of concern that have currently been identified. Do you need a booster dose beyond that? No, you just had your booster dose with that infection. So just consider yourself a winner, claim victory, and bow out.
Well, Paul, we're gonna thank you so very much. As Allison said in the introduction, you're ubiquitous these days. It's just you're everywhere and done all this, and I hope that everybody got enough ear opening stuff to get enough in there to do it. But we will post this online, and we will post contact if they want to follow up with you. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Offit, thank you so very much for your time today.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good luck.
So I'm going to bring back on Allison. Allison's going to introduce our next speaker. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen, Allison Singer.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you so much, Paul. That was so informative. I know we all learned so much. I always learn so much, even though I watch all of your webinars, I always learn something. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. I also want to, in advance, thank our next presenter for taking the time to be here. It's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Dr. Amy Weatherby, who, before I read her lengthy list of credentials here in front of me, I want to personally describe her as an incredibly dedicated clinician and researcher who cares deeply about the welfare of children and families. I have had the opportunity to work with lots of researchers and clinicians, and I've worked with Amy over the years, and really no one is more committed to healthy child development, and no one works harder to ensure that all families have access to resources and to services than Amy Weatherby. So, okay, here comes the real stuff. Dr. Weatherby is a research professor in the Department of Clinical Sciences and director of the Autism Institute in the College of Medicine at Florida State University. She's also the executive director of the Florida State University Center for Autism and Related Disabilities. Dr. Weatherby is the project director of the First Words Project, a longitudinal research investigation on early detection of autism spectrum disorder, which is funded by the Department of Education, the National Institutes of Health, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. She's also the co-developer of the Autism Navigator, which is an innovative collection of tools and courses designed to bridge the gap between science and community practice. It's a highly interactive web platform and includes extensive video footage that illustrates for both parents and clinicians effective evidence-based practices. The Autism Navigator and the new Baby Navigator are important new tools that will help families learn the signs of autism and also learn how best to interact with their children and babies. It's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Weatherby, who will speak today about using mobile technologies to help families detect autism earlier and to improve their child's outcome. Thanks so much, Amy.
Thank you, Allison. I so appreciate that introduction, and what an act to follow. I so enjoyed Dr. Offit's presentation. I'm going to share. Okay, and I'm hoping that you can see my screen. So I am so delighted to be here. I'm going to be talking today about using mobile technology to help families detect autism earlier and to improve their children's outcomes. And I'm so honored to be part of this symposium. I do want to acknowledge that the work I'm presenting and the efforts that we're making to bridge science and practice is funded by the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institutes of Child Health and Development and through our ACE Action Network. So I want to start by reviewing a few different research articles and research findings, and then I'm going to go through 8 different tools that we've developed with Autism Navigator and Baby Navigator to share them with you, and all of these you can get to on our websites through mobile technology. So let's start with advances. The American Academy of Pediatrics recommended screening all children for autism at 18 and 24 months more than a decade ago. We have made advances in how we make a diagnosis, and now we can diagnose children with autism by 18 to 24 months of age. And yet, here's the bad news. The median age of diagnosis in our country still hovers at 4 to 5 years, and it has not changed in more than a decade. And further bad news, children from minority, low income, and rural families are diagnosed 1 to 3 years later. And so this can truly mean that they miss the opportunity for early intervention. Just another example of disparities. So the MCHAT, the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers, is the most widely used screener. And so I wanted to share with you some findings from 3 different studies that recently came out to help frame some of the limitations of the MCHAT, which may be contributing to why the age of detection is not improving. So the first study showed with over 290 primary care providers great success that they used the MCHAT and they screened 93% of children at 18 months of age. So that's really impressive. However, of the children who screened positive on the MCHAT, only 31% were referred to a specialist for an evaluation. And so that leads to the question of, if you're going to screen, then it seems very important that the professionals, the providers, act on the screening as well as the parents, but that's one of our barriers. Another study that was done, actually at CHOP, where Dr. Offit is, this was done by Guthrie et al. And so they also found very similar screening rates at 91% using the MCHAT. But what they did, a very ambitious study, followed up 26,000 children who were screened using the MCHAT with the follow-up interview between 16 and 26 months of age. And they followed them up to 4 to 6 years of age. And so then they were able to look at diagnostic outcome, and they found that the sensitivity of the MCHAT in this primary care sample was 38%. And that means the true positives. So that means that they were actually missing more children who ended up with autism than the percent that they were catching. And the younger the toddlers were, the lower the sensitivity was. And this last study is really important to help us kind of understand what's going on with the MCHAT and put it together. So in this study done in Europe, they followed up this cohort who got the MCHAT at 18 months of age. And again, they followed them up into school age, and they identified 834 children with autism. So then they looked to see, well, what was the accuracy of the MCHAT in catching these children? So what they found is that 28% of the children with autism were detected with a positive screen with the MCHAT. And so that's actually similar, close to the 38% sensitivity. And then they also demonstrated that the MCHAT caught, or 81.3% of the positive screens on the MCHAT were children with intellectual disability, but without autism. So these 3 studies really show us that screening rates are high, but referral rates are low. Universal screening is possible in these large practices, especially with EMR, but the accuracy of the MCHAT is low in primary care settings. And it's missing 70% of toddlers who end up with ASD, and it's flagging 80% of non-spectrum toddlers with intellectual disabilities, which may be good because I'm going to show you now that we're not doing very good catching other developmental disabilities. So the children that the MCHAT's catching with intellectual disabilities is good in the sense that those children also need services, but it's missing the majority of children with autism. And what worries me the most is telling parents you have a negative screen when in fact you may end up with autism. So we need screening tools with better accuracy, not only for autism. So if we look at some data that was just recently reported by the US Department of Education on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So what they reported is that, first of all, to give us a frame of reference, at school age, children in 6 to 11 years old, generally these are kids in elementary school, 12.3% of the school age children in this age range are eligible and receive receive special education. If we go down to preschool and early intervention are mandated in our country, but we are now reaching just above half of the children who get special ed at preschool. And so the 3 to 5 year olds were reaching 6.8%. For infants and toddlers, it's much bleaker. We're serving 3.5% of infants and toddlers. These are birth until 3 years of age. And so what that means is that we are missing more than 70% of infants and toddlers who will go on to qualify or be eligible for special ed at school age. And so that's rather troubling. So I would like to say, from my perspective, I hope others agree, I think it's time to try something different. We need to come up with some different way of looking at this problem because the stakes are high. The impact of missing children with developmental disabilities, particularly autism early, can greatly impact the children's outcomes. So maybe we need to more questions on a screener, different questions, more than a list of questions. So we've been working on developing a new screening tool with a little bit of a different approach. And this is, we've named it the early screening for autism and communication disorders. And so with our approach is to screen for both communication disorders and as well as autism. So we're trying to catch both and have cutoffs. We've conducted and recently published a field test study with 5 sites across the country. And these are children with elevated risk. They were screened for communication delay, and then the ESAC was used after that in primary care, or they were referred for possible concern, which may have been familial concern, or it may have been due to possible early signs that parents or professionals are seeing. We used it with children 12 to 36 months, and we started with a large bank of questions and narrowed it down to the best 30 items that discriminated the children with ASD from the children with developmental delay without autism or the typically developing children. We established cutoffs, and our sensitivity in this sample ranged from 0.86 to 0.92 and specificity 0.74 and 0.85, with the higher figures for children 18 months and older, a little bit lower, but quite good for children down to 12 months. So we're excited about the possibility, the potential of this screener. The results provide preliminary support, and we've been collecting data funded with funding from NIDCD and NICHD that we're working on our follow-up study using the ESAC in primary care. We also had another study I just want to mention that came out this past year where we have created now not just the new screening tool, but a whole mobile platform that includes using the screening tool, but also connecting the screening tool to a whole collection of tools for families once we get the screening results. So we brought our online autism screening tool and our new platform to a large primary care practice and collaborated on this study. And we taught them how to use it, and they used it for a year. And what we were able to demonstrate is that when they had been using the MChat and looking at the average age of referral using the MChat before they started with our new tool was 3 years of age. And we asked them and we encouraged them to screen at 12, 18, 24 months of age. And so what they demonstrated is that they screened, I think it was 100% because it's so automated, it's easy to use, at 12 and 18 months. And we reduced their referral rate down to 20 months of age. So that is exciting. It's the beginning of a lot more research that we have to do, but we're on an exciting path. So then I'm going to turn now to think about, well, what else can we do to try something different? And we've been working on this for the past, I think, decade, but particularly the past 5 years. And so we really think we need a whole new approach to thinking about how do we identify children with autism earlier. And so one of the big approaches that we think is critical is to teach everybody the early social communication milestones. As it ends up, there are milestones that are used by federal agencies such as the CDC. However, they're somewhat outdated and they're really geared to catch children with very severe delays or disabilities. And that is what they're succeeding in doing. So we wanted much more precise milestones to capture the progress in social communication development. So we've been developing these new milestones. And then we also feel like by using photos and videos, we can teach you about these milestones as well as the early signs of autism. So through our work, we've been following really thousands of children and getting videos before we know whether or not they have autism. And so we have a pretty unique library of video clips and photos of children as they've been developing to teach everybody. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to go through my 8 tools real quick. And so I'm going to start with tool number 1, which we started with just photos of early milestones. So how easy is that? And so we started by developing our 16 by 16 lookbooks. And I want to just give you, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just give you some examples of each. So our 16 gestures by 16 months. Did you know that all children should have at least 16 gestures by 16 months? So let's take a look at how they come in. And so at 10 months, children are reaching and they're learning to reach out and to reach up. At 11 months, we see the show gesture. And these are really coming in universally, worldwide, somewhat in this order because it's very much influenced by the development of motor, cognitive, and social skills. The show gesture is a very robust, or the delay in the show gesture, robust sign of autism. So by looking to see if a child is learning to use the show to draw your attention to things can help us spot autism earlier. We also see waving. At 12 months, we start to see tapping in the open hand, pointing to draw your attention to things they're interested. At 13 months, children are starting to learn to watch others and imitate. So they learn gestures like blow a kiss, and look at this little one watching mom so intently as she's learning. At 14 months, we see the point, the index finger pointing at a distance. And then we also see that the child is beginning to learn, we call them symbolic gestures, using their index finger, again, imitating dad using the shh gesture. And then also gestures like stinky, which is something little ones experience on a daily basis. And then all the way up to other symbolic gestures like, I don't know. So these gestures actually propel or set into motion learning to use words. And that is what parents want their children to be able to do, to talk. So helping parents learn these early gestures can really help us catch children with mild communication delays, as well as all the way out to children with autism. So we have our other lookbook, just to share real quick, 16 actions with objects by 16 months. And so by 9 months, children are mouthing and banging and dropping. They're exploring with these actions to learn about all the objects around them. And then at 10 months, they're starting to take off. So they can help take off a shoe or sock or a hat. And then they're taking things out and having fun. And then at 11 months, they're starting to push and turn things. So then they can turn things upside down. But keep in mind, they're doing this to get your social attention and make you laugh. And so it's that shared enjoyment that drives them. At 12 months, they're patting things and they're putting in. And so then this turns into learning a variety of functional actions, so they can begin to feed themselves with a cup, put in their mouth, a spoon, get all messy, but grab the food from the bowl and put it in their mouth, try to. Then at 13 months, as children are beginning to learn to observe and imitate, we see them starting to use these functional actions with others. So they're very beginning on the cusp of pretending. And then at 14 months, they start to use combining actions so that they're starting to achieve things like rolling back and forth with a rolling pin to make something happen, jiggling the pan, and then drumming with the drumsticks going up and down. And they begin to do this in a way so that they experiment with the rhythm and the sound. At 15 months, this is a really important action. They're starting to use two objects together. And so here we see them pouring from one container into another. And so then think about all the things they're able to do and learn. And so this really means that they're starting to have a plan in mind. They can help do chores, washing and drying the dishes, and they love it. They can are eager to take on and help you and wash and dry things. And then at 16 months, these develop into really emergent literacy, which is important for learning to read and write, stacking blocks and drawing, scribbling, we should say, on paper. So what these lookbooks illustrate is the best time to get ready for preschool is from 9 to 16 months. Spotting these small gaps early can really help us catch small delays and get started helping parents support their child's learning early on. So if you think about what autism is a combination of a lack of social communication skills or milestones and the presence of unusual behaviors, repetitive behaviors, restricted interests. So using these social communication milestones and teaching everybody what children should be learning at what age is going to help us catch not only communication language delay early, but also children with autism. So our second tool is video, and the rest I think I'm going to show you more video. So we've developed a series of video tutorials to teach everyone the early milestones, and we have some of them on our Baby Navigator channel on YouTube, so you can get to these. So what videos to answer, really quick videos. What does it take to learn to talk? What are responsive parenting strategies? So I just wanted to show you a really quick 1-minute video to illustrate what these videos are like and to answer the question of when do babies learn to talk?
Babies learn to talk at an amazing rate. They go from sounds to words to sentences in the first 2 years.
Brush. Yeah, it feels funny, doesn't it? Soft. Hard. Yeah. Soft. That's right. Soft.
It all starts with that first cry at birth. By 6 months, babies can make different sounds to let you know how they feel. And by their first birthday, most babies can say 1 or 2 words. They learn 1 new word each week until 18 months, when most children can say 10 to 20 words. Then, like magic, babies begin learning a new word each day. By 24 months, they can use between 100 and 200 words and put together simple sentences.
So I can't tell you how often I hear parents say to me, their doctor, their service provider, or a relative said to them, "Oh, your baby is still young. Let's just wait and see," when they're not using any words. So we have print versions of our milestone. I hope that you'll look at them. I'll give you the websites at the end at Baby Navigator that we've developed from 1 to 2 months, all these different milestones, and then all the way up to 23, 24 months. So if we can be more carefully watching and tracking these milestones, we can change our attitude about let's wait and see to let's get started right away for all children to support language learning and much more, and for children with autism to support their social communication development. So we've developed this tool called Social Communication Growth Charts. So another thing that we have in there is this video explorer, which is really pretty neat. Parents can select the age from 1 to 24 months, the domain or area of learning. And I'm just going to play you my favorite video clip. This is in social interaction. The milestone is I can watch you and imitate what you do and say. So this is learning in action at 13 to 14 months. It's a typically developing child.
Hey, get your pillow. Look. This. Night. Night.
So one of the things I love about this is Dad gets to just lay down and relax and have fun with his baby on the floor. So we have lots of examples of activities. In addition to the Explorer, we have a charting tool. So this is tool number 4. So 1 to 4 are all about typical development and learning. And this doesn't have the stigma of autism. This is for all parents to learn and help their child be better ready for school. And this is our surveillance method to track progress with the milestones and with the videos to help parents. So let's now turn to tools that we have specific for autism. So going back to photos, we've created a 16 early signs of autism lookbook. And just to show you a couple pages to illustrate, it should be easy for you to get your baby to look at you. This is number 1. Babies are motivated to be near you. Look at your face and linger on your eyes. If it's hard to get your baby to look at you, this may be an early sign of autism. And just one more example, number 14. And there's 16 of them, and they're basic. These are from the DSM-5 5th edition diagnostic criteria. Babies with autism can be very focused on or attached to objects that are unusual for their age, such as long strips of cloth, utensils, rocks, sticks, flowing water, or gadgets they can take apart. If your child's very focused on or attached to unusual objects, this may be an early sign of autism. And then we have a checklist that parents can download and fill out with guidelines on referral. Tool number 6, we have extended videos, but we also came up with this elevator pitch. So an elevator pitch is a very brief video or story to introduce the early signs of autism that's quick and we hope compelling. And so if a picture is worth 1,000 words, imagine what a video is worth. So let's start with, can you spare 2 minutes? Children with autism have significant impairments in social interaction and communication. It is this, in combination with the presence of repetitive behaviors or unusual interests, that should signal concern to a trained observer. Think about how typically developing children naturally show a strong interest in interacting, communicating, and sharing their ideas with others, and easily shift their attention between people and objects.
You want me to blow bubbles? Yeah. Can I have the cup? Where's the cup?
Typically developing children listen eagerly to speech and try to figure out what you mean from gestures and other social cues, even before they understand the meaning of words.
Bottle, thank you. Can I have this?
Children with autism have a core deficit in social attention. This core deficit impacts learning and has a cascading effect on brain development.
Get them open. Bubbles. You want more bubbles?
Autism interferes with a child's ability to listen to speech, to notice gestures, to look at faces, and to pay attention to what is important in the learning environment. Autism impacts the ability to learn from people.
Where's the bottle? We're going to say bye-bye to some of these things. Bye-bye, cup.
These developmental consequences are cumulative and can lead to pervasive deficits and extremely challenging behaviors if they're not caught early. So let's do a quick, can you spare another minute to see what you've learned? So what I want you to do with this video is see, you may jot down or just take note of, can you find any early signs of autism after watching the elevator pitch? Here we go.
Did you get it out? Did you get it out?
And this is LB, and he's 20 months of age here. Now that you've been learning about the features of autism, watch LB, who's 20 months old, and see if you can find any early signs of autism.
Spoons down there, all gone. Spoons all gone. Oh boy, now what you got? A whisk? Whisk. Whisk. That's a whisk. Whisk. Whisk.
So that video was about 40 seconds. So here's our list of 16. Here's what Albie showed. Not that we would be wanting to identify from such a short clip, but in a short clip, look at all that you can see, and you're going to want to look across activities. So he showed 11 of the 16, and he's a child who would be easily missed. So very quickly, tool number 7, our About Autism in Toddlers course. After a positive screen, this can be very helpful for you. It's online, it's free, available worldwide. We have, you can go in one question at a time or go into the course. I'd like to end by showing you one more child in a video, and then I will wrap up with our how-to guide for families, which is our number 8. And so I'd like to show you Ryan. This is in a slide in the About Autism. It's also in the how-to guide. You can get to it both places. I'm going to just show you a little bit of him at the beginning. This player has 8 different families. This is what he showed before he received coaching. All of these children were in our early treatment with the early social interaction model, and we coached the family. So just a little bit of, because you'll recognize now a little bit of what he was like when we first met him.
You need some help? You want mommy to help open? There you go. You want to color? Here, get a crayon out. There you go. Do you want to use this to draw? Look, draw a circle. You just want to clean up, huh? Let's draw a little face. Your turn. This is just your size, Ryan.
So in spite of mom working really hard, he's overly focused on the lid and putting it on and off. I just want to show you a little bit of change with intervention. This is a few months later after mom was coached. I'm going to show a little bit of this.
Here's a star. Oh, mama has a star.
Ryan is now 22 months old. After a few months of ESI, his mom is learning how to create a shared agenda.
You get your star, I get my star. And stop. Stop yours.
Here, they each have a star-shaped cookie cutter. Ryan turns it with a circular motion and shows a strong interest in making it spin.
Mine's pretty loud. Stop. I'm going to put a star on your toe. Up, down. I'll put a star on my finger. And can I put it on my nose? You think it will stay? Oh, look at that.
His mom supports a shared agenda by respecting his repetitive restricted interest and trying different playful actions and sounds to draw his attention to her.
You have a star on your nose. Are you going to sneeze? Up, 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 up. Shoo!
So this clip takes you all the way until he's 3 years of age, but you can get to it and watch it. So I'm going to end by just mentioning, so with all of the treatment study that we did, we've had lots of videos that families given us permission to teach you all, and I'm wrapping up here, to teach parents. We have the How-To Guide for Families course, we have a webinar, and we're collaborating with the Autism Science Foundation on building a virtual community for families. So from screening to early intervention, everything's mobile. And so I'm going to go up to a website and let Bill come back on. If I can just put the last slide on. Okay. Thank you. And here's both of our websites where you can get to a lot. Thank you. You want me to stop sharing? Or you can do it.
There you go. There you go. Amy, thank you so much. That's really interesting stuff. I think that people have been waiting for tools like that, and the questions that we have will actually tell you that very quickly. So let me go through them. Given all the new diagnostic instruments and technology, what's your opinion regarding the earliest we'll be able to diagnose autism in the future?
That's a great question. You know, we Baby Navigator is open to the public, where families can go and register, and I think we had 6,000 families come over the past 15 months, register and join. And so we're finding more and more families are bringing themselves between 6 and 12 months, and the early signs are there in many children. But autism unfolds. We know that genetics is one risk factor. It can run in families, or the traits can. And so we don't yet have behavioral features that have been identified under 6 months, but it unfolds from 6 to 24 months. So it's figuring out when can you have that point in time where you can say, yeah, this is autism. And by 18 to 24 months, you can. I think what our work is doing is trying to go down to 12 months, and we hope to go down to 9 or even younger. We've been identifying, we don't yet have diagnostic tools. The ADOS, the gold standard, goes down to 12 months, but you can see the early signs earlier, or at the very least, look for the lack of social communication milestones and get started. You don't have to wait for a diagnosis to get started supporting social communication development.
Okay. So there are a flurry of questions that are about the product or products. So I'm going to kind of one at a time. Is the 16 by 16 booklet available to the general population?
Yes. So everything I showed is, the only thing that has a cost is the how-to guide, but there's 2 ways families can get it for free. If they come to our webinar at this point in time, as much as we can afford, and I hope we can keep doing this, we are offering that for free. If their providers are in one of our courses, they should have enrollment codes. So our goal is that everything is free for families. And the lookbooks are available on Baby Navigator, and the autism lookbooks are also available on Autism Navigator. So if you go to either site or just Google 16 there, and we're working on translating them. We have everything in English, Spanish, and Creole, and we're working on about 10 different translations of the lookbooks and the elevator pitch video.
Got it. You just answered about 3 of the questions in one chapter. Good. Can providers or teachers use track progress and early milestones with students?
Yes. Now our milestones, our social communication growth charts are from 1 to 24 months of age. Families can join. They need to join by 24 months of age. It's free to join because we have funding from NIH to support it. And then they can stay in it until they're 36 months of age. For children who are older, we think the how-to guide is appropriate for families of children from 1 to 8 years of age if you suspect autism or challenging behaviors or big social communication delays. And so we have a print version of growth charts in the how-to guide, which would be more appropriate for older children that are not age referenced for under 24 months.
Okay. A majority of referrals should come from pediatricians and early intervention evaluators. With all that we know about autism, how do we convince them to make the referrals when they become aware of the behaviors that are relevant before them? No matter how sensitive the screening is, with the referral, the median will stay stagnant at 4 years old.
Right. So that's why we need to think about this differently. I don't know that primary care physicians are the only or the right person to do the screening. I think they need to be part of it. We need a care team, but we need to think about the general pediatric population. How do we reach young children? Because remember, the early intervention system is missing 70% of children. So if you just screen there, and if you wait for doctors to refer, remember they're only referring 30% of the MCHAT who's missing 70% of the children with autism. So that's why we haven't changed. I think that what doctors have told us is they often are waiting for the parent to say, I'm worried about autism. Then they'll talk about it. So let's arm parents with this information, go to Baby Navigator, fill out our early signs checklist, take it to your doctor, work together. But also, how about early childhood teachers who are seeing lots of children, parents just learning and sharing this information with your family. So I think we have to go beyond. I think the primary care medical home is in the middle, but we have a lot of other agencies and we have faith-based organizations. There's so many different options to connect, get the children involved. We've been working with the National Black Church Initiative to try to reach minority families. And so getting them registered for Baby Navigator and charting and screening, and then they can invite their doctor in. So then we have a care team and we have this mobile platform for that to happen. So I think we have to go beyond. It's not working. We got to do something different or we're not going to change the early. We've demonstrated this for a decade. So it's just time to go beyond, but that doesn't mean exclude doctors, include them as part of the care team. They don't have the time to have these difficult conversations. So they need community partners. They need to be in the center, but working with community partners is what we think is part of the solution.
So several of the questions here are regarding the word fear. And I think you're just addressing the edge of that, because you've got the educators or the teachers or the deciders are some of them are naturally afraid of actually bringing up and being wrong, bringing up and being right, not bringing it up. And so the way to address that, I think, is what you're referring to here, is educating the parents first to go back to the people that are deciding.
Yes. It's really educating everybody. So we have professional courses as well for doctors and other service providers to teach them early detection and our early intervention model. But it's also educating everyone, because it's this push-pull. You've got to have the doctors pushing the families and the families pulling the doctors along. We need both. And we hope that we have resources that are available for free, really globally. We have a very wonderful global community in many of our webinars that we offer. If you go to Autism Navigator and click on webinar, we have 12 different webinars that are free on different angles on this. And we often have individuals from at least 60 different countries that come. We have over 180 countries of individuals who've registered for about autism in toddlers. So this is a global problem. The mobile technology can have a global reach.
We're getting down to the end of the question, not the end. I have more questions. How many we can fit in? What age do the family how-to videos include? How old are the people that are being?
Yeah, great question. So we have families. We also have a preschool to second grade course for teachers and other educators. We did a study of K through second grade. So we have videos from young toddlers up to kindergarten through second grade from the research. The videos all come from our research studies, and we will be adding more videos. So that's why we say we think it can be helpful for parents just get started right away, opening it up and learning how you can support your child in everyday activities. We have lots of examples to show you how to do it.
Is there, we're just about done here. Is there a difference between boys and girls?
Great question. We are going to be studying that. We did one study. I mean, there's a lot of suggestion that we're missing more girls. I was on the DSM-5 work group, the neurodevelopmental work group, and we had a lot of discussions about, are the diagnostic features sensitive as much to boys and girls? And I don't think we fully know the answer to that. We need more research, but there's a lot of research going on, and with our large sample, we're getting larger sample of girls. So we're going to be very interested in studying what are the symptoms that are unfolding in boys versus girls, so we can do better. We are catching more and more girls in the past 3 to 4 years, so we're getting better at not missing the girls, but the girls may have some protective mechanisms that the signs may not show up as early.
Okay, last question, but I want to tell everyone there's a longer list here, I must tell you. We will forward all these questions to Amy directly, and Amy, you could follow up with her. Her contact information will be on the website when we do post it. Some of the videos we have today will be available, some will not, depends on the presenter. So if one's writing the questions, be a little patient for us to get this posted out to the speakers, and we'll go. But the last question I'm going to let you talk to here is, has there been talk about involving hospital staff at delivery units? You said everybody. That's a really broad statement of who is everybody. Grandparents,
Yeah.
Could be
So
at-home providers, babysitters, everybody, right?
Everybody. So you can join Baby Navigator when you're pregnant. We're trying to reach out to newborn screening at the hospital. Of course, OBs, getting pregnant moms in. And then if we can get them in early, we're going to be adding a point system where you get points and you're going to be able to get real stuff for those points. So we're just trying to motivate families to get in early. But of course, the primary care doctor is important, but we need this whole care team. We have lots of home visiting systems. Faith-based organizations are really important. Education systems. The early intervention system, remember, is missing most of these children. So in order to really change the age of detection and get the intervention going sooner, we've got to reach out to these community-based places where families go. We've tried screening at grocery stores and department stores, wherever, but now that we're online, it's really reaching out. Like I'm hoping, like on Delta, maybe they could play a little video or PSA, right? When parents on the plane, they can fill it out. We need to think differently, and we need to think big, and we need to think of new ideas. So we're excited to have all of you. Please go to Baby Navigator, go to Autism Navigator, check out and share our resources. Find one parent of a baby and have them join, and imagine what we could begin to do if everybody did it.
This has been terrific. It really has been. It's been just by the Q&As, I just know that you've reached a lot of people here. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for a great presentation. And as I said, we'll post stuff on our website, rocklandautism.com, foundation.com, and we'll go from there. So again, Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I so appreciate it.
So our next speaker is Miss Anji Kaplan-Gal. Joining us from Israel, Anji is an occupational therapist with over 18 years of experience working with children with complex developmental disabilities and their families. She is the lead occupational therapist for Bet Izzy Shapiro's Early Intervention Center. If you do not know, Bet Izzy Shapiro is Israel's leading developer and provider of innovative therapies and state-of-the-art services for children and adults across the entire range of disabilities, impacting over 500,000 people annually. Bet Izzy promotes social change through a three-pronged approach: development and provision of a cutting-edge services, changing attitudes in society, and advocating for better legislation, and sharing the knowledge throughout Israel as well as internationally through research, consultation, and training. Anji has a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy from Tel Aviv University and a master's degree in child development from the University of Haifa. Angie's topic today is Making Sense of Izzy Senses, by Izzy Shapiro's Multi-Sensory Environments, Snoozlin methodology. Ladies and gentlemen, Angie Kaplan-Gal.
Hello and welcome. My name is Angie Kaplan-Gal. I am an occupational therapist with a master's degree in child development. I have worked in Beit Izzy Shapiro for the past 18 years in our early intervention center and in other departments, such as our dual diagnosis department. And I was the director of the Izzy Senses department, which is our multi-sensory environment center. In today's lecture, I will tell you a little bit about Beit Izzy Shapiro and our early intervention center. I will talk about our multi-sensory therapeutic environment, or Snoozlin, and describe how we use it as a therapeutic tool. Lastly, I will tell you about an interesting research we are currently conducting in this field. Beit Izzy Shapiro is Israel's leading nonprofit organization with a mission to build a more inclusive society across the globe by advancing the rights, equal opportunities, and services for people with disabilities, impacting on over 500,000 people annually. Beit Izzy Shapiro's expertise is in scaling up its impactful solutions, thus promoting systematic change in the lives of people with disabilities in Israel and internationally. Beit Izzy Shapiro has special consultative status with the UN's Economic and Social Council. The Aaron Delow Early Intervention Center started as an intervention program for children under the age of 3 and their families. At that point in time, our government provided intervention programs for children from the age of 3 and above. And we at Beit Izzy Shapiro recognized the need for an early intervention program. From the start, the idea was to provide excellent therapeutic and educational services in the community. This was important for us, to have a center in the middle of a neighborhood and not in some faraway institution. This is what we believe in, that people with special needs are an integral part of our community and should be treated as such. We developed a therapeutic and educational model by which we work. It was always important for Beit Izzy Shapiro to share the knowledge and educate other early intervention centers. Additionally, we understood the importance of advocating and lobbying for early intervention solutions in the government, because we believe that every child with special needs and his family deserves to have access to the best therapeutic and educational treatments. Beit Izzy Shapiro was among several organizations in Israel to lobby for and contribute to the passing of the Early Intervention Rehabilitation Law. As a result, today, every baby with special needs in Israel is entitled to be admitted to an early intervention center. Many centers were established all over Israel. Our early intervention center is family focused, as we understand that a baby's family is the most valuable and meaningful environment and context for him or her. In our center, we strive to provide families with a place they can feel respected and heard. Very often, we are their first stop in the long journey that is ahead of them, where the family starts to accept their child and understand what they are facing. We truly believe that families are the experts concerning their child, and so the parents and the professionals are partners in helping the child reach his or her full potential. Our kindergartens are like any kindergarten, with daily routines consisting of gatherings, playing, singing, holiday and birthday celebrations, etc. We put great emphasis on participation. Participation means that the child can take an active part in any activity that he wants, that he finds enjoyable, that he is curious about, that is culturally important for his family, and more. This requires the professionals to find exciting, age-appropriate, fun activities that encourages the child to initiate and learn. Often, the professional need to make adaptation to that activity or to the environment so that participation will be possible. One of these environments is the snoezelen. First snoezelen room was set up in 1983 at the Der Hartenberg Institute in the north of Holland for adults with developmental disabilities. The word snoezelen is a combination of the Dutch verbs snuffelen, to sniff out, and buzzelen, to snooze. In Israel, the first snoezelen room was constructed at Beit Izi Shapiro in 1993, headed by Dr. Michelle Shapiro, an occupational therapist who understood the great potential this environment can have as a therapeutic tool, and started developing our working methodology there with other professionals in Beit Izi Shapiro, as well as conducting the first ever research on using snoezelen rooms in therapy. True to our belief for sharing the knowledge and educating others, we developed a training program and have trained over the years over 7,000 people, both in Israel and abroad. So what is Izi Senses? Our multisensory therapeutic environment, or snoezelen, consists of three parts. Firstly, the hardware, which is the actual equipment in the room. Secondly, the software, which allows for the dynamic use of the hardware. For example, for various ages, population, stages of development, etc. And thirdly, the therapeutic processes, which we believe is the key component which turns this unique environment into a therapeutic environment. To maximize the Izi Senses environment as a therapeutic tool, you need all three of these components working together. Multisensory environments have a certain look and feel created by typical equipment used in such rooms. Traditionally, multisensory environments are painted all white. This enables the room to be a blank canvas upon which anything lighted has great contrast. In such rooms, there should be the ability to darken it completely. The floor is covered in mattresses, as are the walls. This contributes to the special acoustics created and to the safety as well as feeling of softness. The equipment can be individually switched on or off. This important feature allows the therapist to design the environment according to the sensory needs of the client, as well as change anything during the therapeutic session itself, according to what happens with the client in the room. The enabling therapist is what we call our therapeutic approach in the room. The approach of the enabling therapist is based on the assumption that when a person is given freedom in a safe and accepting environment in which to choose and act, this person will not only tend to show more initiative, but will also succeed in expressing himself better, whether in spoken language, using augmentative or alternative communication, or through actions. The approach is based on a therapist who always believes in the strengths, efficacies, and capabilities of the client, and consistently puts across this message. Throughout the treatment, the therapist is attentive to the client, watching and observing him. The therapist looks for hints and nuances in the client's responses in order to try and learn and understand where the client is in terms of adaptation of the environment to his sensory needs, as well as his sense of security or anxiety, pleasure or discomfort, motivation or lack of interest. The therapist always keeps in mind the goals of the therapy, but it is the client who leads the therapy at his own pace. The experience of therapists in the snoezelen room shows that this therapy has the potential to produce a parallel experience for them alongside that is experienced by the client. Therapists report a feeling of release, calm, increased motivation, strengthened therapeutic and personal connection with the client, positive stimulation, and hope with regards to the client's capabilities. In addition, the sense of release gives enabling therapists the possibility of entering into the client's world, bringing themselves into his world and enjoying the interaction with him or her. Due to the ability to identify even the smallest progress in treatment, the therapists say that snoozelen rooms give them a feeling of hope and belief in the client's ability to learn and advance. Many therapists describe the experience in the snoozelen room as a kind of magic, which brings out the best in the client and offers a unique and safe interaction. So now I want to show you some of this magic that happens and how the snoozelen provides us with opportunities for play, joint interaction, and fun. In this short video clip, you will now see Eve, our kindergarten teacher, is playing with Segev, who is 2 years old here. He has Prader-Willi syndrome. You will see them playing in the snoozelen with a box and a car. Please notice the iPad that Eve placed next to them, and on it is Segev's communication board. Her goal is to engage him in the game, for him to be an active participant in the interaction. This is made possible by Eve being an enabling, attentive therapist, and by the environment which provides him with the security, quiet, and stimulation that he needs. It is important to emphasize that at this point in time, Segev was not able to play like this in other environments. He would either move quickly between different activities or lie on his back, uninterested.
איפה? אתה רוצה את המכסה? איפה הוא? וליס? גור. איפה? איפה האוטו? אוטו. אוטו. איפה? נוסע נן. פיפ פיפ. נכון, הנה האוטו. הנה. תוציא.
So, after seeing Segev, I think you will agree with me that the snoozelen environment can be a good therapeutic tool for working on developmental goals of play. Because for children, playing is what they do. It is how they learn, and through which a lot of their development occurs. We can work on advancing the child's level of play. For example, from a sensory motor playing abilities to functional play. We always try to connect with a child's inner world. What interests him? What makes him laugh? What motivates him? Using fun and playfulness in this process. We always want to find a significant activity, fun and interesting for him, with it being just right. Challenge him a little beyond his abilities. We want to reach that inner drive, that motivation. The activities are directed by the client. We want to encourage adaptive behaviors that is effective, that achieves a certain goal, and that is accompanied by a sense of control. I now want to show you another short video clip, this time of me with Ariel, a 2-year-old little boy with cerebral palsy and eyesight impairment. We are in the snoozelen using the interactive flooring system. Ariel is very clever and curious, but is dealing with major motor difficulties. He can sit up by himself and move his arms, but cannot be mobile in any other way. In the clip, you can see that thanks to the opportunities the environment provides us, we are able to play together a meaningful and fun game of catching the fish.
את הדג. טוב. שים אותה. והם שוחים. ואנחנו והם שוחים, ואנחנו תופסים אותם. עוד פעם? שנתפוס אותם עוד פעם? כן, הם שוחים, ואנחנו תופסים אותם. את מי תפסנו? את מי אנחנו תופסים? את הדג. איך עושה הדג עם הפה שלו? איך הוא עושה? אתה צודק, הם שוחים. ואנחנו תופסים. גם היד הזאת יכולה לתפוס. לתפוס. מה אתה רואה למעלה? מה יש למעלה? יש אור. מה יש למעלה? מה יש שם?
דג?
יש שם דג למעלה? יש אור.
The snoozelen gives us the opportunity to use multimodal communication. This means we can use many different ways to communicate. For example, using communication boards like the one you can see now on the slide. These can be printed out on paper or installed on iPads or on a communication computer using eye gaze software, which I will show you and explain a little later. Other important modalities are gestures, sign language, and of course, sounds and spoken words. The snoozelen provides us an organized environment that can be adjusted to the sensory needs of the client. For example, the client can hear better due to the special acoustics in the room. The client can hear himself better, the sounds around him, and the therapist. The therapist can hear the client better and is able to pick up on every nuance that hints towards making a connection. Another feature of the room is the fact that the room is dark, and so anything that is lighted stands out with contrast, allowing the client to notice the stimuli better. So, for example, if you present a child with a communication board on an iPad, he will see the screen better in the snoozelen, and therefore be able to notice the board and use it. I want to show you now 2 more video clips. In these videos, you will see RAS, a speech and language pathologist, with Ariel, the same boy you saw with me. In the first video, you will see them sitting near one of the bubble tubes. There is a computer in front of Ariel, and on it, eye gaze software. This software allows the eyes of the user to operate the computer. Ariel in this clip is just beginning to learn how to use it. You will see the moment that he looks at the screen and says soap bubbles, and later chooses the word catch, thus asking to catch the bubbles. In the second clip, Ariel and RAS are working on his ability to use his voice and pronounce different syllables.
תגיד לי, אני שמח. איזה יום. שמח לי היום. איזה יום. אנחנו יכולים לשחק היום, לשחק עם הבועות. בועות.
בועות סבון.
וואו.
בועות סבון.
בועות סבון! נכון. מה נביא עכשיו? אולי ניגע בבועות, ניגע בהם עם היד?
יד.
אתה רוצה לגוע עם היד?
יד.
או עם הלחי?
לתפוס.
אתה רוצה לתפוס אותם? לתפוס עם היד?
יד.
יאללה, בוא נתפוס אותם עם היד. נבוא, איך נבוא אנגי? אז באמת נשנה. נביא את זה לפה. פה, 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 פה. יופי אריאל! תשאיר איתי, תשאיר. גה, 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 גה. גה, גה. יפה! פה, 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 פה. פה, פה. גי, 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 גי. גי, גי. גו, 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 גו. גו, גו. גו, יש! כל הכבוד! בוא נעשה לה, 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 לה. לה, לה. ולשבת.
New Zealand is really like a laboratory where you can practice communication. In this picture of Noam, a 2-year-old boy with Down syndrome, and me, you can see a very special moment. We can look at the environment and think together, what is helping his learning process here? He can see me very clearly against the background. He can see the gesture clearly and hear the sound I make. He gets a good sensory input from the balls around him. All of this together creates this magical moment that was captured in a photo. According to the conversation model by Ninyo and Snow, the first level is joint presence, where Noam notices me and can practice saying hello or calling me. The second stage is us focusing our interaction around a mutual activity, like playing with the balls in the pool. The final stage there is joint attention, which allows for conversation and play. So the Snoozelen gives us the perfect opportunity to work on our therapeutic goals, such as enjoyment, which is first and foremost, allowing the client to be an active, initiating participant in a dyad and triad interaction, trying to attain that joint attention together, reciprocity and turn-taking, beginning and ending interactions, communication acts, expanding play and world knowledge, processing and understanding language, experiencing expression of emotions, needs and thoughts, and much more. In this next video of another therapeutic session with Ariel, this time with both RAS and myself, you will see how all of these goals are incorporated and made possible for him in the Snoozelen environment.
בוא נבנה את המגדל, גבוה גבוה, וגם נשים את הגרביים על המגדל. אוי! עם הרגל, אתה עושה עם הרגל בום? בום! טרח! נפל! נפל! בום! 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 נכון! בום! כל הכבוד! עוד פעם, מונגי, עוד פעם! בוא נבנה את המגדל ונעשה בום. תראה, אני בונה את המגדל ואפילו שמה את הגרביים שלך על המגדל. איי איי איי, זה מצחיק, תראה. נפל. בום. נכון. ובום. נפל.
Hope that I've managed to show you so far how the snoozelen can be a meaningful therapeutic environment. I have felt it over the years with many clients, and my gut feeling told me that my ability to adjust the environment to their sensory needs contributes to the therapy and our ability to achieve developmental goals. However, I always felt gut feeling is not enough and that we are required to research it. As you can see on the slide, there were researches done in the past on this topic by the research department in Beit Easy Shapiro and Dr. Michelle Shapiro. I can send these to anyone here who is interested, but just to give you an idea. The first research, done in collaboration with the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, investigated whether the snoozelen environment reduces challenging behaviors such as flapping of the arms, screaming, spitting, etc. in school children with severe developmental delays. They found that those behaviors were reduced in the snoozelen environment and also found some lasting effect later on in the classroom. Second research, done in collaboration with Haifa University, looked at the effects of lighting. A kindergarten classroom in our early intervention center was installed with special lighting similar to the lighting in the snoozelen. The research showed the effects on the toddlers with developmental delays compared to the regular lights used then in the whole of Beit Easy Shapiro. As a result of this research, all of the lighting throughout Beit Easy Shapiro was changed to a soft, non-flickering light. The third research, done with the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, looked at the dental clinic environment, bringing into it elements from the snoozelen, such as lighting, sound, vibration, and deep pressure. They showed that this adapted dental environment lowered stress levels for children with developmental delay and typically developing children undergoing dental treatments. Those researchers better support that the snoozelen is a valid therapeutic tool, but it was time to do more. And so, 4 years ago, I heard for the first time about the polyvagal theory and understood that finally there was something that might help me explain this gut feeling. To explain a little bit about the polyvagal theory, I need firstly to say a few words about the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system is one of the body's major systems for maintaining homeostasis. It is responsible for the control of bodily functions not consciously directed, such as heart rate, blood pressure, digestive processes, and breathing. Besides the physiological conditions, interaction with the environment and psychological states affect the balance of the autonomic nervous system. In order for this system to respond well, it needs to have the ability to respond in different ways, sometimes indicating to the body that we can relax and be calm, other times that we must get up and go, be active and productive, and at other times signals us that we are facing danger. That is, this system needs a variety of options to adapt our inner system's responses to changing environments. A system that has a variety of options is a healthy system. In a simple way, the amount of this variation can be measured by estimating heart rate. Our heart rate changes all the time. It responds to breathing rate, temperature, having a good meal, or being active, stress, and more. This variety in our heart rate can be quantified. We do this by a measure called heart rate variability. High variability represents an adaptive system. In situations of stress, fear, pain, and effort, our heart rate variability becomes low, which means the system is less responsive. The polyvagal theory talks about the role of the vagus nerve in emotional regulation, social engagement, and fear responses. It explains three different parts of our autonomic nervous system and its response to stressful situations. It basically refers to how environment influences behavior. Simply put, the autonomic nervous system is affected by the environment and is in a constant relationship with stress levels, which affects performance. Safe environment equals less stress, which equals better performance, which means higher autonomic regulation. In a meta-analysis comparing heart rate variability in individuals with ASD and in controls, done by Cheng et al. And published in 2020 in Neuroscience and Behavioral Reviews journal, they found that the baseline heart rate variability is already lower in individuals with ASD. They also found that the heart rate variability reactivity under social stress in subjects with ASD is significantly lower than in individuals without ASD. But heart rate variability reactivity during cognitive tasks does not show any significant intergroup difference, again showing the effect of environment and type of activity on function and behavior. This is why I felt it could help my understanding, because New Zealand is a safe environment, and I was seeing changes in behavior and function with children I was working with there, and wanted to understand the connection. So we teamed up with Professor Mikhailova from Tel Aviv University, and these days we are conducting a preliminary research in the Early Intervention Center in Beit Izi Shapiro. Our goal is to identify the therapeutic potential of different environments for intervention with toddlers with cerebral palsy. We want to understand which environment will promote our ability to give the best intervention. We are trying to understand regarding each child in our research group whether the environment is relaxing or arousing. Is it enabling focus, learning, and practice, or is it enabling physical activity? So how do we do that? In our research, we are measuring the autonomic response therapeutic environments amongst 10 toddlers with cerebral palsy. So far, we have measured 7 toddlers out of the expected 10. We are measuring the heart rate variability using an electrograph placed on the body, like you can see in this picture. This device is attached to the child 3 days in a row for 4 hours each day. During this time, the child goes through his regular daily routine, while a research assistant shadows him and records any activity that he is a part of, for example, breakfast or going out to the playground, as well as recording his reactions such as laughing, crying, position changes, whether he's lying down, sitting or standing, coughing, talking, or making sounds. Also during those hours, we take him in a random order, once into the regular occupational therapy room and once into the snoozelen. There, we have an identical protocol of intervention, 15 minutes. At the end of each day, we download the data from the device. In our preliminary findings, we can see that overall, in the snoozelen environment compared to the occupational therapy room, the heart rate variability is higher. This means that stress levels are lower. So the potential to participate is higher in the snoozelen because the child has more options and variability from an autonomic point of view. This is an objective measure, and although this is only a preliminary result, it supports our mode that a safe environment equals less stress, which equals better performance and higher autonomic regulation. We are excited and curious to analyze all the data from all the participants, and we will be very happy to share with you the results. This brings us to the end of my lecture. I hope I managed to explain and show you today how we use the snoozelen, or easy senses, as we call it in Beit Easy Shapiro, as a therapeutic tool, and how meaningful it is for our clients and therapists. I will be happy to answer any questions now. Thank you.
Angie, thank you so very much. By the way, it's only 7 hours difference, so she's not really that sleepy yet. We've talked about this before. Terrific stuff. I'll tell you that there are a bunch of questions here, but they really end up around the same kinds of topics. But I wanted to mention also that Camp Venture has had a snoozelen room for years now. It looks similar to what you showed. So the first question is, the amount of space and time and expense applied to the amount of people that can help. It's a very one-on-one kind of process. And in a case like in the U.S., in the case of Camp Venture, for example, for them to go ahead and apply therapeutic or snoozelen theories, it's a very heavy process, personal process. Meaning it's not like 6 people and one therapist. It's one therapist and one person. So how far can that expand or extend out to a wider portion of the population?
We do a lot of one-on-one therapy in the Easy Senses room, but also a lot of group therapy. And I think that working in groups can be very, very successful. We've had a lot of success with different populations, and in fact, we have some experience for adults with ASD who come into our Beit Easy Shapiro to have group therapy, and they enjoy this environment very much because of the way that it is adapted to their sensory needs.
Right. So is early intervention the most logical way to use this, or is it more applicable? Can it be used in a school environment or in respite, whatever, other places?
No, I think it can be used for any population, and in fact, in Israel, it is used in hospitals and in old age homes and in schools, and so it's really widespread, and it can be very successful. And it's just important for me to stress that although the room is very special and unique and has a lot of interesting features, the most important part is, of course, the therapist, and that is why we put a lot of emphasis on training and supervising and trying to really work evidence-based, so the work there is meaningful and it doesn't become kind of a just a chill-out space or something like that, but used as a therapeutic tool.
I will say on that little tiny point that having been in Ventures, it reminded me a lot of being a teenager in the 70s with Pink Floyd playing in the background, but that was another time. That did answer a question about how are they trained? What is the training process for therapists?
So our training program consists of lectures regarding the sensory issues and our methodology of how we use the enabling therapists, and we use therapists from all disciplines. So we would have physiotherapists and occupational therapists and speech language therapists who are specialists in working in Easy Senses room and give their perspective. And also a very important part is after the course we give supervision meetings, so you can go in and try and have questions and dilemmas and reach out to us and kind of figure out what to do and how, and we think about that together. But that's part of the training too.
Okay. Two more questions. Was there any real significant difference in the change between a regular OT room and a Susan room by gender or by age or by level of disability?
So no, there weren't. Because it was just 7 children, it's such a small amount. So the question is, of course, no. But this is just a preliminary research, and we really hope to of course widen it and then check more kids and more populations, and we'll see what happens.
Terrific. So the last question, actually, 2 people asked kind of the same. One leads into the other. Can this be used as a sensory room? And therefore, what is the difference between a snoozer room and a sensory room?
So I don't actually know what they mean by a sensory room. We don't have that in Israel. I don't know. I just see it as a therapeutic space. So whether it's a sensory room or a snoozerland or easy senses, it's all the same to me. I think it's a very allowing and safe, interesting space where attentive and enabling therapists can really work and achieve goals with the clients. So the environment is important, but what you do within it and the therapist is the most important component in all environments, really.
I appreciate that. Angie, I wish we had time to hear you explain the origin of your name from your mother's dream, but thank you so much today. I think that people really enjoyed this, and we'll be able to post some of the data that we've seen, or some of the videos we'll see. There are some things that can and cannot be shown, so just follow on the website. In the next 3 to 5 days, we'll have something posted. Again, Angie Gal, thank you so much for staying with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So now for our last 2 speakers, I want to introduce 2 New York State legislators. First, I want to bring up Senator Elijah Reichlin-Melnick. State Senator Elijah Reichlin-Melnick represents the 38th District, Senate District, covering most of Rockland County and part of Westchester. Locally born and raised in Nyack, he was elected in November 2020 and is currently serving his first term, where he's focused on ensuring our communities remain affordable, safe, and healthy places to live and work. He chairs the Senate Committee for Contracts and Procurement and serves on 6 other Senate committees, including Education, Consumer Protection, and Transportation. And now for New York Assemblyman Mike Lawler. Assemblyman Mike was elected to the House on November 3rd, 2020, and his district comprises the southern portion of Rockland County. As an Assemblyman, Mike is working hard to reduce the state's onerous tax burden and bring fiscal discipline to its budget, provide law enforcement with the resources needed to do its work, and craft legislation to improve public safety. So now, as an intro to what they're going to talk about today, I'm going to ask everyone, do you remember that guy that gave up? Well, neither does anyone else. But these 2 fresh faces are known for their relentless drive to find answers and provide meaningful solutions. As part of a growing coalition of concerned parents, we believe they will help light a torch to signal state and federal governments that help is needed in the ASD community. Akin to the grassroots campaigns of 50 years ago, it's time to rattle the cages and enlighten all to the current futures for those in the broader IDD community. So, Senator and Assemblyman, the mic is yours to speak to this topic the way you want.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for that introduction, and thank you everybody for joining this morning. And it's particularly an honor to be here with all of you on such an important topic, and with my colleague, Assemblyman Lawler. This is it's a great panel because while of course we come from different parties, we may disagree on some things. This is an issue that unites people across the aisle. And we're going to be talking about some legislation this morning. I'll talk about some, Assemblyman Lawler will talk about others, but we support it. This doesn't matter Democrat and Republican. This is something that anybody that cares about having a moral state that lives up to our commitment to help the people that most need help, and what good is government if it can't do that, supports these bills that we're going to talk about. And there's so much going on. And, Mike has been a great partner in working on a lot of these issues with me and with so many of our new colleagues. We've both had this experience as first-year members of the state legislature at coming in, trying to move the state in a direction that is a compassionate place for people who need help, as so many people who are here today do. So, Mike, before we start talking about bills, I don't know if you want to kick it off.
Yeah, just thank you, Senator, and thank you to Bill and Cheryl and the team over at Venture for putting this together. Obviously, this is a extremely important topic, as Senator Reichlin-Melnick said, and it's something that we have worked on together and will continue to work on together. Just earlier this week, we held a press conference via Zoom with some of the direct support staff and personnel to talk about the need for increased wages and investments in our IDD community. And it's really about priorities. It's about prioritizing what is most important in our state and in our community. And those with intellectual and developmental disabilities are important, and they are our priority. And we have a moral obligation to help those who cannot help themselves, and to support the great organizations such as Venture and Joanio and ARC and all the great work that they do here in Rockland County and other organizations across New York State. And I think both of us are fully committed to doing that and to doing everything in our power to address these issues. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with Senator Reichlin-Melnick and talk about some of the important bills that we've introduced, that we've voted on, and that we want to continue pushing forward over the next term and session starting in January. So I'll turn it back to Senator Reichlin-Melnick to get started, and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Mike. And I think we're going to kind of trade off talking about some of the bills here, but there really is a lot. And again, to reiterate, these are all bills where we have the same position on, and really most of these either passed unanimously or close to it, because thank goodness, I think we do have a legislature that by and large cares. We haven't always had that partner in the executive office in Albany, and I'm hoping a lot of us are, with a new governor who comes from a different background than our old governor, we may get finally a partner rather than a rival. And we've had somebody there for a long time who year after year would look for ways to cut funding and balance budgets on the back of people with disabilities, rather than finding ways to help people make ends meet, help the workers and help the families and help the people that need our help most of all. So just to mention a couple of bills. So one really important one, which I was happy to support and which did pass and has now been signed into law, recognizes the challenge that so many parents and so many kids with intellectual or developmental disabilities have had during the COVID pandemic. Remote learning has been a disruption for all students, but particularly students with IEPs, students with IDD. They have had a significant challenge. And so current law has always allowed for people to get educational services from their local districts up until they turn 21. And we finally took a step this year, knowing the disruption the COVID pandemic has brought, to raise that age up to 23 for any student that turned 21 during the last couple of school years, when COVID has been bringing such challenges to our communities. This was a unanimous vote. Our former governor did sign this into law before he left. And for anybody that turned 21 during the 2019-20 school year or the 2020-21 school year, they can continue to get services from their district now for their IEP until they turn 23, whichever is sooner. And these are very difficult times. And so we're certainly hoping that this does make some difference. And if need be, and COVID continues to disrupt in-person education, although we certainly hope it won't, we'll be certainly looking to extend this further if the need arises.
And just to weigh in on that, I think it was, as the senator said, a really important piece of legislation. One of the original versions of this bill was Assembly Bill 1201. It was an Abenati bill, and it was one of the first pieces of legislation that I signed on to when we started our term in January. And when you look at the remote learning aspect and the impact that had on all of our students, but especially those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It really was necessary to expand the age from 21 to 23. And I think all of us in many of the conversations that we've had, we'd even like to see it go a step further. And I think that's something that down the road we can really examine and see how we can expand it and obviously fund it to make sure that those opportunities do exist, to ensure that our children are getting the educational opportunities that they need and deserve. And so I think this is a good first step, and it's something that I think we would both agree, we want to see what else we can do to make sure that those educational opportunities are there, whether it goes to age 25 or beyond, because obviously it's important. And that activity and that stimulation is critical for all of our children and young adults. And so that's something that we're going to look towards for the future. Another bill that we had looked into is Assembly Bill 7690, Senate Bill 6277, and it requires certain data to be included in the statewide comprehensive plan for persons with mental disabilities to the extent practical. And this is important because it helps New Yorkers understand how public funds are and are not supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities by age, by race, ethnicity, primary language spoken. And I think for us as legislators, as we go through the budget process moving forward, I think it'll help us further identify where some of the shortfalls are, where we need to invest more to help these children and these young adults. And so that's a critical piece of legislation to collect data and make sure that we are really fulfilling our requirements to help these children. And that's something that all of us as lawmakers and stakeholders within the IDD community, I think will benefit from as we move forward and making sure that the funds are spent appropriately.
100% agreed there. I think that's a very important bill that we passed. I was glad to vote for it. So the next one I want to talk about is actually one which I introduced and was proud to pass through that really had been stuck for a long time in committee prior to my arrival in the Senate. And for the first time, we were able to move it through the Senate and the Assembly, and we're waiting on the governor's signature. And that is an important bill. It's Senate Bill 5560, Assembly Bill 5339, that totally changes the way that we provide the funding for early intervention services, which particularly benefit people in the IDD community. And these are just vital, life-changing services provided to children up to 3 years old, where any delay can have major ramifications throughout a person's life. And yet the way that the state has always funded these services is fundamentally broken. Parents who are the parents of a child who's diagnosed with some sort of developmental delay and needs early intervention has kind of been left to fend for themselves. They have to submit their claims to an insurance company. The insurance company denies 85 to 90% of those claims and kicks it back to the state and municipalities to pay. And it keeps this whole process stuck in limbo. Providers of these vital services are really the ones who lose out because they're not getting reimbursed. And as a result, the number of providers providing the services over the last several years has been dropping in a very concerning way all over New York State. And of course, the result when providers leave the field is that parents and children wait longer to get their needs addressed. And that, again, when you're talking about treatment that even starting a couple months later can have major long-term impacts is unacceptable. So the bill we passed requires a $40 million covered lives assessment fee assessed on the insurance industry in New York State. That $40 million will be used directly to pay claims arising out of early intervention services, get money into the pockets of providers sooner so that they can keep their doors open and make sure they're providing the services to these young children who need them as soon as is possible. This was a bill which Juanio was very strongly in favor of. They understand how vital these services are, and I was proud to partner with them and so many other providers in order to work with Assemblywoman Amy Paulin in that side of the House and get this bill over the finish line. I am urging the governor to sign it. It hasn't gone to her desk yet, but I hope she'll recognize this is a game changer bill for early intervention, and we need her signature to make this law.
Absolutely. And I really want to thank the senator for putting this forward and pushing it through on the Senate side. And obviously, I was proud to support it in the Assembly. Anytime you're talking about early intervention and access to services at a young age, it obviously makes it better for the child, for the parents, for everyone involved. And so I think this is a critical piece of legislation. And as the senator said, strongly encourage Governor Hochul to sign this as soon as possible, because it obviously will have an immediate impact on families all across our state. And so that's something that we definitely both want to see get through immediately. Another piece of legislation that pertains to some families, obviously, it has to do with child support orders. And it's Assembly Bill 898, Senate Bill 4467. And basically what it would say is that a person who otherwise would be charged under the law with supporting a minor child is also charged to support that child up to the age of 26 if it's determined by a court that child has developmental disabilities. And I think that obviously is something that impacts a lot of families. We know the cost associated with caring for a child with disabilities can be great. And so, being able to ensure that those resources are there, and that the family members that need to provide are providing, and that those resources are ordered up to the age of 26. And again, I think what we've seen, and it goes back to the first bill we talked about, extending the age to 23, the more support, the more financial resources that are there, the better these young adults will be. And so that's something where I think we're all recognizing the need to really adjust and to move forward in a way that is really focused on what is in the best interest of the child or the young adult, and regardless of kind of the financial resources that it takes. And so I think that was an important piece of legislation that has been put forward.
I'd agree with that. And actually, it's interesting. I was speaking with a friend of mine over the weekend who's a lawyer specializing in divorce cases. And he was saying this is a great bill to see because it actually gives them an additional ability representing clients to be able to advocate for the support. Because, of course, there are additional financial costs to support somebody who may have serious disabilities and need additional help. So if you've even got the divorce lawyers on board, I think this is a good one. And, it's going to have real impact on people. So the next bill I wanted to highlight is one which my former boss, Senator James Skoufis, has introduced. And this also passed unanimously in the Senate and in the Assembly, Senate Bill 1836, Assembly Bill 3130, and this would establish the Office of the Advocate for People with Disabilities. This would be a new state-level position to advocate on behalf of people with disabilities, assure that they're afforded all of the opportunities that everybody else should have to exercise the rights and the responsibilities that every other resident of New York has. This was passed unanimously. It would create this office within the State Department of State and be the coordinator for implementation of the ADA. There is not currently an agency level office out there for people with disabilities to ensure that those sorts of state programs aren't discriminating and that they're accessible to people no matter what disability they may have. We know that there are way too many cases out there where people find programs that they have difficulty accessing because of their disability. And so they don't know where to turn when that happens. This is a really critical office. It'll work with state agencies, develop some new regulatory and legislative changes suggested to help support the duties of this office. And now this is another one where our new governor has a choice to make because this bill passed the Assembly and the Senate unanimously in 2019 as well, and our former governor vetoed the legislation. We passed it again this year, and I really hope that Governor Hochul will change the position of our former governor, as she's been trying to do, and sign it into law this time when you've got every member of the state assembly and the state senate Democrats and Republicans alike supporting a bill. It's a good sign that this is something worth doing, and we hope that she'll sign it into law when it gets to her desk.
I think, one of the key points here is over the last 11 years, the former governor really, tried to balance his budget and, do things at the expense of OPWDD and those with disabilities. And I think having an advocate that can go out there and speak on behalf of the families, the providers, and especially those receiving the services is critical. And I think they will be a tremendous asset to the state, to the legislature, to keep us informed of a lot of the challenges that are going on across the state, and make sure that it's front and center in our minds when we're going through the budget process, when we're crafting legislation, and really hold the executive branch and the governor's feet to the fire. And as the senator said, we're hopeful that this governor will sign this into law and do what needs to be done moving forward, and really make changes from an executive branch level in terms of how we deal with those with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So that's something that I think this legislation is important, and my hat's off to Senator Skoufis for really pushing this. Another piece of legislation that we've worked on this year really has to do with tuition and regional rate reimbursements for approved school age and preschool special education programs. And obviously our 4410 and 853 schools have not been receiving the funding that they needed to provide the top quality services to our children. And so this bill really seeks to address that and make sure that they are getting the resources that they need. Obviously, as with everything, we always want to do more. And I think there's opportunity as we move forward to continue to build on this, but it's certainly a good start. We had so many calls throughout the course of the year about this particular piece of legislation and the impact on 853 schools and 4410 schools. And so I was really happy to see this move forward. And I think it's something that it's a first step and not the end. And we're going to continue to push to make sure that there's parity across the board when it comes to funding and reimbursement rates.
Absolutely. And, we made historic investments this year in the state in K-12 education through the foundation aid formula, more than $1 billion of new funding to schools. But there's no reason whatsoever that these schools that serve the IDD community need to be second-class citizens here. And in fact, of course, they need to be first-class citizens, because if anything, when you have a school serving a population with the highest needs of all, we want them to get the funding they need to deliver services as effectively and as efficiently as possible in order to get these kids the best chance to go on and succeed in their lives. So I strongly supported this, and we do hope we're going to keep going with this. So the last bill, which I'm going to talk about today, is another one that's passed both houses and is waiting on the governor's signature, which we hope she will provide. And this is a bill, S-1766 and Assembly Bill 1153, that establishes the Office of the Independent Intellectual and Developmental Disability Ombudsman Program. And this is a program which will help assist people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to ensure they receive coverage from managed care organizations that really is appropriate to meeting their individual needs, and to establish this independent IDD ombudsman program. It is going to include the identification, the investigation, any referrals, resolving complaints that are made by or on behalf of consumers relative to the coverage they're getting under managed care organization, any kind of access to initial or to continuing IDD services and supports, as well as advocating on behalf of such services. It's a worthwhile program. And again, similar to the Office of the Advocate for People with Disabilities, kind of speaks to the lack of current state programs and state people that are there and have it as their full-time role to help people in the IDD community access the programs that they're legally entitled to. So we hope Governor Hochul will sign this, and looking forward to moving forward with this one as well.
As the old saying goes, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I think having advocacy, having an ombudsman program, I think obviously will go a long way in ensuring that those in the IDD community are getting the services that they are entitled to, and that they're not being mistreated, that they're not being underserved, and that they're not being discriminated against. And I think everything we can do to shine more light and make sure that there is more attention brought to these critical issues is a good thing. So I strongly hope the governor will sign this. The last bill that I'll talk about, and then I know there's a few other topics that we're going to just touch on and take any questions. But the last bill that I'll talk about is one that I've introduced in the legislature. When I came into office, my predecessor, Ellen Jaffe, had introduced this bill. And so it was something that when I was looking through the legislation that I felt was important. And that was really to require schools to develop a seizure action plan for students diagnosed with seizure disorders, and have teachers trained for if a student has a seizure. And there are a few other versions of the bill. My colleague, Missy Miller from Long Island, who's the mother of a child with developmental disabilities and who has experienced a lot of seizures over his life, as well as Pam Hunter from Syracuse. And we're trying to work through getting this bill passed next year. I think there's a lot that we can do to address this topic, especially within our school systems, and make sure that the training and the resources are there to assist both the teachers and the administrators, as well as obviously the students. And so that's something that I'm really looking forward to continuing to work on. We're working on in a bipartisan way in our House of the state legislature, and I know the Senate has a companion bill as well. So we're working through it, and it's just an important bill that I think we get across the finish line next year in Albany.
Agreed.
So one of the things that I want to just touch on with the senator, during the budget process, we joined together along with Assemblyman Zabrowski, Senator Skoufis, Assemblywoman Gunther, and really pushed back against the closure, the proposed closure of Rockland Children's Psychiatric Center. I want to thank the senator for his leadership on that. I think it was a great joint effort, and we were successful in getting it out of the budget in terms of the closure and making sure that the funding was there to keep it, keep those beds funded and keep our employees that work there there. And I think it's a critical facility within the region. It's the only facility between the Bronx and Utica. And it's something that obviously has been a part of our community for a very long time to ensure that children in this area are getting the services they need if they need that type of service, that type of inpatient service. So that's something that I was proud that we worked on together and were able to accomplish.
Absolutely. And this is another example where this really isn't a partisan issue. This was Democrats and Republicans. This was unions. This was healthcare workers. This was parents and patients and advocates, all pushing for the same goal, which is to maintain the principle that if we have a government, we should be providing services to people that need it. That is the core role of government, is to help people get through difficult times. And treating children in mental health crisis is one of the most difficult things there is to do. And to simply pawn that off onto the private sector and leave people to figure out how to get treatment, and God forbid they don't have the right insurance that wouldn't pay for it, it's unacceptable. And so we're going to keep fighting back, although I hope with a new governor, we might not see as much of a push to close these sorts of facilities. So I don't know, Bill, I want to do a time check because I know we want to leave time for questions too, right?
We are there, sir.
Okay, great. So I'll defer anything else I have to say and happy to take some questions.
No, I must tell you, I learned the knee of John Murphy, and the phrase that we always used was mother bears. It was mother bears that sort of revolted and said, not with my child, you can't, you don't. And that's what started in 1960 and 70 and was probably there before, but that's when it got real popularity. And a lot of the gains that came about because of them, and not just mother bears, John Murphy and many, many other people participated in this around the state, around the country, for sure.
Yep.
But some of those gains have been lost or been changed, ergo lost, because the thing about it is if it's in the eye of the beholder, and if you don't have a child with special needs, you really can't have quite the conversation. So I know that Ben Gilman and Sam Coleman and eventually they birthed John Murphy, and those people carried the banners. It sounds to me, if this is all true and this is all going the way that you hope it goes, that you guys we thought you might be the kinds of guys that could start to carry the banner again. It needs to be carried. And the questions that I'm going to give you, they fall into certain categories, but they keep touching the same points. Some of which you may have answered. I've seen long lists of things that people are just up in arms, and as someone close to me said, there's an uprising coming. I don't know how it becomes, but the uprising is about someone needs to pay attention, and the bills that you're talking about certainly start to do that. But let me get to some of the questions, and we'll get to as many as we can in the time we have left. One parent's quote was, I represent hundreds of concerned parents who are very concerned about OPWDD's draconian cuts to the most vulnerable in our community. We'd like to know if we can rely on the newly elected officials to fight for our loved ones.
Well, you certainly can. I mean, we pushed back extremely hard in the budget against former Governor Cuomo's proposed cuts. We'll continue to do that, and really beyond just fighting cuts, fighting for increases, because that, again, I just keep coming back to it. You know, there are differences of opinion about what what government programs we should be focusing on. There shouldn't be a difference of opinion that the main function of government is to help people who are otherwise going to be left to fend for themselves. And that, we've got to get agreement on that. And I will continue to support OPWDD programs, oppose cuts, and really push to bring more funding for things like that. And I want to mention, even at the local level, I was very happy to be able to get into the budget some line item funding for both Joanio and Arc of Rockland in order to support the programs and services that they provide.
Understood. And Venture hopes to be on that list soon.
We'd love to do.
Bill, the one, you mentioned John Murphy, Sam Coleman, Ben Gilman, Eugene Levy, Tom Morahan. We've had a long list of state and local representatives in Rockland who have championed this community. And I think both of us are fully committed to picking up that mantle and working together on these topics. And I think wherever we can find state funding to support Venture, to support Joanio, to support ARC, we will. And and it's little things and it's big things. And I know in the town of Orangetown, they're looking to build an all-inclusive playground. They're looking to build a splash pad to help with children with disabilities and make sure that it's accessible. So it's little things like that that make a community great, and then bigger things like the programs and the services that you're providing. And I know the senator and I are going to be making an announcement sometime soon about funding that we're looking to support the town on. And I think it's everything that we can do to help this community, we will. And you have our commitment on that.
Terrific. There's a common theme in here about the DSPs. You did touch on some pieces there, but let me just put these together for you about DSPs. Will they support the Better Care, Better Jobs bill that gives DSPs a living wage? And what measures are you taking to support a living wage for DSPs? Hang on. There's salary for DSPs. It's a number of them that talk about it. Higher pay for DSPs. So if you could address that. And then secondly, is there a place in here, or is there a movement in here to address the immediate shortfall of DSPs because programs are closed because there are no people to work them. And that's got parents staying home, changing jobs, leaving jobs to take care of their people.
COVID has obviously wreaked havoc on a number of fronts, obviously from a health and safety perspective, but certainly from an employment perspective. And I think obviously, there are people who are concerned for their own health and safety. And then obviously you have the situation with unemployment and pay. And I think when I look at New York State's budget, okay, we increased on the enacted budget year over year. We went from 177 billion to 212 billion. We increased spending by 35 billion. A lot of it came from federal funds that were, sent New York's way. But to me, it's about priorities. And we, as I said earlier, we have an obligation to help those who cannot help themselves. And so within this community especially, it is critically important to ensure that we have qualified, trained professionals who are being paid a fair and appropriate wage to do the job. You cannot continue to have turnover. You cannot continue to have short staffing. You cannot continue to have a situation where people do not want to work in this field, not because they don't care, they do, but because they can't afford to, because they're being paid more to do another job. And so that's something that I feel very strongly when we look at the New York State budget and the funds that we are allocating. When we increase spending year over year by 35 billion, you can't tell me there's not funding there to support this community and to increase wages and to make sure that we have the proper resources to pay people a fair wage in this industry especially. And so I can commit to you fully, I will not support budgets that don't increase the funding for the IDD community and that don't increase the funding to ensure that we have appropriate pay wages for our employees.
Yeah, I think Mike and I certainly agree on these issues. And when we passed the Senate budget resolution last year, we included $600 million to raise the pay for DSP and home care workers. And unfortunately, again, this was something where our former governor took a very firm and uncompromising stance and refused to allow this money to get up into the final budget. That continues to be my priority. I'm really hopeful we'll pass a budget resolution this year or 2022 that, again, will have this money or then more in order to provide people with a decent wage. We have got amazing, dedicated, compassionate, caring people who provide these services, but we can't ask them to do it out of altruism. That's not a sustainable model for any important function of society. We don't ask police officers to work for nearly nothing out of a sense of duty to the community. We don't ask teachers to go to school for minimum wage out of a duty to the community. We pay people what they're worth. And the folks who provide these services are worth a tremendous amount of money. And when we're a society where you can have a baseball player making $30 million a year, and you can have a DSP or a home care worker making minimum wage or lower than minimum wage in some cases, less than $15 an hour, it's unacceptable. We need a better answer, and we need to find the funds to do it.
Okay. Couple of combined and then maybe a final one or so here. Two questions. One was on can a student who graduated in June continue in school even at 21, and different but similar, would a child who turns 18 this year be eligible to stay in school until 23?
I mean, my understanding is based on the bill that we passed by Senator Harcum that the governor signed into law extending services for people with IEPs, that they probably would. I guess it would depend on the individual case if there was some extenuating circumstance, but by and large, I think the answer would be yes.
That's my understanding.
Okay. By the way, we will be forwarding all these questions to you, so there are some we didn't get to, which you will have the opportunity to address yourselves. There's one here that leads into maybe the last two. The point was made about adults needing more in this environment than children are getting. Children, the focus is on children. In most of our presentations today, many that were focused there. Fabulous is what should be done for the future. But the current path, the people who are already 42 and 53 years old, whatever, and they're already living in places that are in a life that doesn't match up with what the parents thought or what everyone thought when the revolution happened. Revolution, I refer to, right, the Mother Bears. So shelter workshops, you know what they were. In specific, Venture had an entire warehouse that was dedicated to doing this. It was a great program. It filled many things, from social needs to very, very modest earnings needs and things like that. But it gave a sense of purpose in life and direction to many, many people. And I know it was across certainly across Rockland, certainly across the state. Is there any thought to getting back to that?
Yeah, I think there's opportunity too, you know, and it's just, you know, you look at the challenges that we face across the state, and I think when you look at the opportunities and what we need to do, I think there's definitely pathways, but we got to focus, and we got to build support and consensus, and really advocate and champion and you know, make noise, be you know, cause good trouble, you know, and I think that's something within this community that we can and should continue to do. So yeah, I think it's possible. Sure.
And Bill, I lost the connection a little bit while you were speaking, so I'll kind of just say yes to what Mike just said there.
Well, thank you for funding our new Northern Campus renovations. It's really terrific that you agree with Mike. That was wonderful.
I got the check right here.
By the way, I'm a Queens boy. By the way, there is a splash pad we're building up north as well, just so we'll talk about that separately. Which leads me, Mike, as a setup actually to the last question. Autism Symposium has been thinking about approaching the two of you or whoever is appropriate to consider a meeting with parents on these topics, and hosting a session where we do this in person and they get to do this, because you know, we only have today who we have. You kept a lot of people interested. This is good. We kept a lot of people still on, but that, I think, it's the uprising. It's people need to vent, but people need, and the answers are sounded great, but they need action. And they're you know, the guy who's 42 who acts like a 7-year-old needs action today, not 2 years from now.
So, no question. And I think both of us, I think in our you know 10 months in office, have been very active. And I think we've crisscrossed all over, you know, our respective districts, and I know I can speak for the senator in saying that we would be happy to meet with parents. We'd be happy
Absolutely.
to meet with advocates. We'd be happy to meet with the providers, and those receiving the services, and hear from everybody directly, in person, and anytime you want us there, I know we'll both be there.
We'll arrange it.
Yeah, let's get it set up in the next month or two before we have to start going back to Albany, because we want to know. I want to know certainly what's on the minds of all the parents, so I know what things I need to fight hardest for when we get back there in January.
I promise you, we will arrange it, and we'll be in touch and make this happen. Guys, it's been terrific to have you. I said to Fresh Young Faces, you certainly played the role today, and 10 months, you know, it's long, but it's short, so we understand. You just got to keep doing what you say you're doing, and the comments about the prior administration are not lost on people down here at all, especially not in this community. So thank you so much today. We will post some of this stuff online. It is a recording. You'll be up there. But thank you again today, and keep pushing forward.
Thanks so much, Bill. Thanks, everybody.
So as we wrap up, I want to thank our speakers, Paul Offit, Amy Weatherby, Angie Gal, and the Senator Reichlin Melnick and Assemblyman Mike Lawler. We hope you found value in our program today. I also want to thank our production team, Cheryl Ward, Ray Matera, and Dan Schul, for weeks and weeks of diligent work that resulted in the effort today. We hope you enjoyed it. We thought it had value. you certainly can give us feedback to let us know. We expect to post the available content and contact information for all the speakers today on our website within several days. And as much of some of the content is not allowed to be produced. We have to get through some of that. Some of the people have been really, really good about it, and some just are their hands are tied. So we'll have it up there, but we certainly will allow you to contact them. We hope you enjoyed yourself. So we want to say so long and have a great day.
Mm-hmm.